Hi everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. And this is our second webinar. And most of you are joining us to learn about neurodiversity in the educational sphere. So there's lots. Thank you so much for all the educators who have joined in and the educational professionals. We also say hi to all the occupational therapists who have joined, and there's a big cohort from the CDNTs and the other charities in this space. So thanks again for joining us. This webinar will be recorded, is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with the participants afterwards. I'm Nessa Hill from Neurodiversity Ireland. It's a charity that was founded a couple of years ago. Mostly, one of the reasons that we founded it was because of the difficulty that we actually faced in getting a school place for our kids. So myself and a couple of other parents from the area encountered difficulties like being told not to bother applying to the local school because we wouldn't get the amount of support that was needed, or the fact there weren't autism classes, for example, for other kids in the local area, and a couple of the parents were really involved in setting some of those up. So that was one of the drivers. Another one of the drivers was the stigma that we faced from lots of people, basically. Stigma that we faced from lots of people when we, were discussing the fact that our kids were neurodivergent. So with that, we decided to start Neurodiversity Ireland, and we have three aims, really. One is to support children who need support. I don't need to tell anybody on this call about the crisis that is the Children's Disability Services at the moment, and the lack of actual supports that we get on the ground, the AON crisis, and I suppose the kind of turmoil that some people experience in education with children with additional needs. So we provide support on the ground. We have a centre in Blackrock where we support almost 180 children a week with occupational therapy guided group sessions with the lovely Jack, who is here, and I'll introduce him in a second. We also give webinars like this for professionals, but also for parents. We want to share the knowledge basically as widely as we can about neuro-affirmative values and practices, and do as much as we can to update people on what it means to be neurodivergent and neurodiversity affirming. And then the last piece is the kind of advocacy part on a national level. We want to really, remove the stigma that attaches still to being neurodivergent. And we do that at, I suppose, talking to all the stakeholders in government and to people like yourselves. So I'll not bore you anymore and just introduce the panel very briefly. First of all, the first presentation is going to be from Jack Cairns, who is our senior occupational therapist and clinical manager with Neurodiversity Ireland. Just let you introduce yourself.
Hi everybody, my name is Jack. I'm one of the occupational therapists on the team for Neurodiversity Ireland, and I'm going to do a little piece this morning just on like an introduction to neurodiversity and the neurodiversity movement itself. I'm going to pass you over to our next lovely panelist, Julie.
Hello. Hi, I'm Julie. I'm a speech and language therapist who I've just founded a company called Be Me Therapy. I'm very interested in neurodiversity affirming practice with a particular interest in Gestalt language processing. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what it means to be neurodiversity affirming in terms of the communication side of things with a focus on education. So I look forward to chatting to you all in a little bit.
Thank you, Julie. And then finally, Davida.
Hi, my name is Davida Hartman. I'm a psychologist and adjunct professor at UCD School of Psychology, an author, and I'm one of the clinical directors and principal psychologists at the Children's Clinic and also the Adult Autism Practice, both of where we provide fully neurodiversity affirmative services, mostly focusing on autism identifications. We try not to we're trying to move away from assessment and diagnosis, and I'll talk a bit about that more when I speak, but that's the main body of my work is around identification and support with autistic children and adults.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you, Davida.
I'm going to share my screen, and Jack is going to do our first presentation, which is an introduction to neurodiversity and neuro-affirmative values and practices. Sorry, I also should say Joan McDonald is our final speaker, and I've just forgotten about you, Joan, because you're not in the room with me. That's one of my things. I need to see it to remember it. That's how my brain works. Joan is the founder of Positive. She was one of Ireland's first special educational needs coordinators, and she has been working with the Middletown Centre for Autism for the last couple of years. She's a trainer, a consultant, and works closely with teachers in really driving neuro-affirmative practices in the education setting. So Joan is also going to give a presentation, and I'll let her do a little bit more introduction at that stage, but I'm going to pass now to Jack.
Good morning, everybody. This presentation that we usually do is usually kind of an hour plus kind of long. So we try to condense it down as much as we could. So we will give a list of references and kind of further reading at the end. So we really encourage everybody to do a little bit of further exploration on all of these afterwards. I suppose neurodiversity itself is just the overarching term encompassing how there's so many different brain types and how everybody can process and experience the world differently. Neurodiversity itself, if you're looking at diversity, that of course means variety, and neuro of course means brain or nervous system. So within neurodiversity, there are two main, I suppose, spheres of different kind of neurotypes. So a neurotype is just a specific way that the person experiences the world. So for example, autism is a neurotype, ADHD is a neurotype, being neurotypical is a neurotype. And if you're looking at neurotypical, that is what we call the majority neurotype or neuromajority. And that's the way that most people experience the world. And then for ourselves here at Neurodiversity Ireland and on the call, we deal with a lot of people with the neurodivergent community. So these are people that fall in the sphere of like I said, autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, and things like that. And I suppose it's important to know that neurotypical and neurodivergent under the sphere of neurodiversity are specific neurotypes. So a person is either neurotypical or neurodivergent. One person isn't neurodiverse. That would just refer to the community of people. And these terms, I suppose, were coined by Judy Singer, Harley Bloom, and Cassian Asasumasu are kind of the three main people kind of credited with, I suppose, creating the terminology kind of around this. And then on the screen here, you're going to see what we call the neurodivergent umbrella. So this is an inclusive concept that encompasses as many of the neurodivergent neurotypes. So on the screen there, you'll see the more traditional ones that everybody's very aware of. So like I said, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and it also includes people who may acquire, I suppose, brain differences later in life. So people living with dementia, people maybe have had an acquired brain injury, and maybe people who are stroke survivors. I suppose it's really important to know that neurodivergent umbrella was created to be as inclusive as possible and not to be exclusive. And I suppose it's the language around this and the terminology include this is constantly changing over time, and new neurotypes are constantly being added to the neurodivergent umbrella as well. So what you see here on the screen is just a snapshot of some of the ones that we've chosen to include today. And of course, as time goes on, and as our understanding of how the brain works, more and more will be added to that as well. I suppose just like everybody's fingerprints are unique to them, so is our brain types, and so is how our brains work. So we categorize different brain types based on how people experience the world. This is usually in regards to sensory processing and understanding social, I suppose, communication, and in social understanding as well. And these differences can be fundamental, leading to unique ways of thinking and interacting. And while some differences are more pronounced, they all contribute to a broader range of perspectives. space. And we know that neurodiversity is a natural, valid part of human diversity, and the neurodiversity movement is about moving away from the more deficits-based medical model approach and around the social model of disability, which is that a person's disability isn't specifically integral or, I suppose, inherent to them itself, but it's as a result of the societal barriers that are often placed on people as well. We know that different brains work differently, and people, I suppose, with the neurodiversity movement, the neuro-affirmative approaches, we're just reframing that, people who are neurodivergent, aren't necessarily developmentally delayed as such. They just have unique developmental trajectories, which is a valid way of being. We know that neurodiversity has always been around, and there's a really interesting theory we always like to mention called the hunter versus farmer theory. And this was a concept created by a psychologist called Dr. Davida Hartman in the early 90s, who proposed that, these a lot of these traits of neurodivergent people have been, hugely advantageous for human societies. So, in ancient societies, survival required a huge variety of skills, and the early human communities were divided into roles that helped the group thrive. Some were gatherers, some were hunters, some were caregivers, for example, and individuals who commonly display traits with ADHD, such as hyperactivity and ability to hyperfocus and immediate tasks, would have been really highly suited to the hunter role. Like I mentioned, the theory was popularized by Thomas Hartman, who's done a load of really interesting research, and wrote a really good book called The Attention Deficit Disorder, A Different Perception, which was first published in the early 90s. I suppose the term neurodiversity itself was coined in the late 90s by an Australian social scientist called Judy Singer. She is somewhat of a controversial figure, and a lot of her values wouldn't align with a lot of us within the neurodiversity movement at the moment, but she is often credited with the creation or with the coining of the terms neurodiversity. I don't know if there's any Grease fans in the room, but she was particularly inspired by the character of Eugene. So she was fed up of seeing characters like Eugene, people who were good, people who were kind, and constantly being bullied, picked on, and just being accepted as part of the norm. She'd done a lot of great work with another individual called Harley Bloom and Steve Silberman, and I would really encourage people to have a look at them after the call as well. Singer's work encouraged people to see neurodivergence as part of, the natural diversity of humanity. And we know that, within humanity, there's such value in diversity, and it's diversity in neurological wiring, like diversity in physical traits such as, height, skin color, body shape, helps increase resilience and adaptability. A society with varied perspectives and skills can tackle problems more creatively and effectively. Just as having a genetically diverse population helps protect against disease, we know that neurological diversity can enhance our collective ability to innovate, empathize, and problem solve as well. We do want to highlight the experiences of neurodivergent people who are disabled by a society that is not inclusive and that views difference with the lens of fear and stigma. We acknowledge that much of what is disabling for a neurodivergent person comes from being a minority brain type within a neurotypical world.
I'm going to pause just there. And the other thing that I want to just point out, Jack, in that is that under your umbrella, it's probably worth saying that most people who are neurodivergent, they're not just neurodivergent in one way.
Yes.
That there's usually a constellation of things.
Yes.
And that's why we're the infinity loop and Neurodiversity Ireland rather than one thing in particular, because it feels like they come hand in hand.
Absolutely, and there's so much evidence so that there's so much co-occurrence between so many of the neurotypes. So there's a huge correlation, especially between autism and ADHD. So people who are autistic, I think the stats say that up to between 50 to 80% will also identify with having traits with ADHD as well. And again, like we mentioned, it's not about being exclusive as a neurodivergent umbrella, and people will identify with different ones throughout their lifespan as well. Obviously, within the neurodivergent umbrella, there's so many neurotypes that can be talked about. We're just going to give 4 brief descriptions on 4 of the kind of, I suppose, most common ones or most typical ones that people might kind of come across, you know, whether through their work, whether through media, whether through school, whatever it may be. So the first one we're going to talk about is around being autistic. So to help, you know, autistic brain processes the world differently than neurotypical brains, like I mentioned, particularly in relation to social communication and sensory processing. It's estimated that more than 90% of autistic people have sensory processing differences compared to their neurotypical peers. So for example, this might mean that they might have, you know, either more heightened sensitivity to certain senses or more diminished sensory sensitivity. And this can impact an autistic person's participation in certain environments if they are not set up to accommodate sensory differences. You know, people who are autistic often excel in areas that require intense focus on areas of interest, pattern recognition, and deep specialized knowledge. Autistic traits like honesty, direct communication, and dedication are strengths in so many environments. That autistic people may experience social situations differently. That doesn't mean that they lack the ability to form meaningful relationships. They simply might have different ways of communicating and relating. And hopefully Julie will give us a little bit more of an insight into that on her talk. And I suppose the next one then is around being dyslexic. So the dyslexic experience reflects how a brain processes written and spoken language and information differently than their neurotypical peers. This neurotype does not reflect intelligence, but rather differences in how the brain organizes and interprets symbols. And actually, typically, dyslexic people often have average or above average intelligence. Many dyslexic people have exceptional verbal skills, strong problem-solving abilities, and innovative thinking. Their brains may naturally excel at big picture thinking and creativity, which makes them really well suited for fields like entrepreneurship, design, and the visual arts. We know that dyslexia can also foster resilience as individuals develop strategies to navigate a world that is often more geared towards those with typical patterns and processing. Our third one then is around being an ADHDer. So being an ADHD is often categorized by differences in attention, focus, and energy regulation. ADHDers often experience bursts of energy and creativity, leading to an ability to think outside the box and approach challenges with innovative ideas. Their minds can be highly attuned to novelty and excitement, which allows them to excel in fast-paced, dynamic environments. Many ADHDers thrive in careers and situations where multitasking, problem-solving, and flexibility are valued, such as healthcare and startups. And there are misconceptions about the ADHD experience as being that of the stereotypical hyperactive kind of boy. We know that ADHD is experienced in a much more diverse way than this, such as the typically more internalized experience of that of ADHD women and girls. And our final neurotype we're going to mention today is around being dyspraxic. So being dyspraxic is characterized by differences in, motor coordination, motor planning, sequencing, and sensory processing. These differences impact a person's participation in daily living activities. Dyspraxia can also impact a person's speech, organizational skills, and social emotional skills too. However, a dyspraxic person doesn't necessarily lack motor skills. It actually means that the brain processes movement in a different way, leading to possible difficulties in motor coordination for daily living tasks. And we know a dyspraxic individual's strengths and difficulties can vary significantly from person to person, and it's not a reflection of intelligence or capability. Also, because they may have to approach tasks differently, and they often develop unique ways to adapt and find alternative strategies to get things done. This can make them exceptionally resourceful and being able to think outside the box. And I suppose just a little bit on the neurodiversity movement itself. It is a social and human rights movement, and it advocates for the rights of and celebration of neurological differences, which, as we've discussed, are natural variations of human diversity rather than disorders that need to be cured or fixed. It seeks for the world to recognize neurodivergent people as a minority group within society. This movement does challenge ableism, and for those that don't know, ableism is the discrimination against people with disabilities. It aligns with the broader disability rights movement, which pushes for, equal rights, access and inclusion for disabled individuals in all aspects of society. In Ireland, disability rights laws such as the Disability Act 2005 and the Equal Status Act 2000 aim to promote accessibility, protect against discrimination, and ensure that disabled people have the same rights and opportunities as others. There is a big shift lately, as I said, from the medical model of disability, which focuses on treating and fixing individuals and getting people to conform to what is more socially and culturally acceptable, and moving away to, I suppose, validating everybody's unique way of being and living. And I suppose emphasizing that disability is not an inherent flaw, but often a result of societal barriers that need to be moved. There's a huge list of, I suppose, different advocates and different activists that we can share on the slide later on, but some really good ones we'd love to mention is Ido Kahar, Kasasayan Asamasu, Joan McDonald, of course, is also on the call, Tiffany Joseph, etc. And I suppose the neurodiversity movement itself has been strongly forwarded by many neurodivergent people and their voices. I suppose what's great about now in the information age is that there's so many more platforms for neurodivergent people to be able to have a voice, to be able to have a community where they can, I suppose, share their lived experiences, have that kind of external and peer validation, and being able to have, I suppose, more platforms, more reach to be able to reach more people in the community. There's in many ways the neurodiversity movement itself mirrors other social justice movements, such as those for gender, race, queer rights, and this does so by challenging societal norms, fighting for recognition, and striving for equality, dignity, and the right to exist without discrimination. Language and approaches that were once used and accepted in society will no longer be. And this movement focuses specifically on fostering inclusion, respect, and understanding of neurodivergent individuals as valuable members of society. I suppose some of the biggest hurdles for this movement include a lack of allyship from the neurotypical population, and cultural norms of fearing difference, and deeply embedded ableism within political, education, and social systems. Again, there's a list of some other kind of advocates that we've kind of included in here. So for the likes of Lydia X.E. Brown, who's a prominent autistic activist, writer, and advocate known for their work in disability justice, neurodiversity, and social justice. Dr. Nick Walker from Neuroqueer, Pete Warmby, who has a really well-known book, Untypical, and many others. And again, like we mentioned, these slides will be shared with everybody afterwards, and we'll definitely encourage people to have a little bit of a further reading through them. I suppose just the last little bits that I just wanted to mention is around, I suppose, language use. So, language, as we know, is such a powerful tool that shapes perceptions both for individuals and for communities. And, the terms that we use influence how people with disabilities are viewed and how they view themselves as well. Our language and shapes our thoughts and shape our views, and our views, is what we present out to society, especially within the educational setting. Children don't know bias from a young age. They learn it from others. So the language that we use is so important to be able to role model for kids especially. We recognize that language evolves as understanding deepens. So we have a Neurodiversity Ireland language guide, which is available on our website, which we encourage everybody to have a look, and we can send them around kind of afterwards as well. And it's a living, breathing document. It's constantly being updated as we learn more. It's that old saying of, when you know better, you do better. I suppose the shift from acceptance to celebration is key. Neurodivergent people should be included and celebrated, and not asked to be accepted by society. Disability is not a dirty word itself, and it's a valid identity. Everyone's experience is valid, and we must honor these different viewpoints. I suppose on the screen there, you might see two different, spheres of language. So on the left, we've got what we call identity first language, and on the left, we have on the right, we have person first language. So person first language emphasizes the person before the disability. So for example, person with Down syndrome, man with ADHD, woman with Tourette's, etc. This approach underscores that a person is defined by their humanity first and not by their disability. It is favored by the United Nations and by the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, but it is not universally preferred. I suppose there's three main subgroups within the disability community, who are the deaf community, the blind community, and the neurodivergent community, who typically prefer what we call identity first language. Identity first language, as you can see, places the disability before person, and this approach aligns with the social model of disability, where the disability is seen as an inherent, valuable, part of that person's identity, which is something to be celebrated and not to be separated from. And we also want to respect individual differences. So, if a person requests specific language, and we will honor their choice, people's, I suppose, use of their language may change over time as well. So people who first start their identification journey may, align first with person first language, and the more comfortable they get, they may align first with more identity first language. And equally so, it could be the switch or the opposite for other people as well. And we, of course, recognize and validate everybody's use of language. And if anybody asks us to use a certain language frame with them, and of course we would. And finally, then you'll see on the screen the box on the left, the box on the right first, which is, I suppose, more historical terms that we would no longer use, in terms of we would tend to avoid. And the left, then, they're more, I suppose, neuro-affirmative, I suppose, substitutes. So like we mentioned before, people who are autistic or people, with ADHD, don't view it as, deficits or disorders, just as neurotypes, disability, and just natural differences. We would move away from, I suppose, the terms such as special needs and impairments, and reframe that as additional or diverse needs. The term special needs itself is also just, it can be quite infantilizing and patronizing. And these, terms such as, additional or diverse is a lot more inclusive and a lot more progressive way of framing these. We also do reject terms like unit, ASD unit, and special needs unit. A classroom is a place of learning, and units are, historically more associated with, mental health institutions, with, criminal institutions and things like that. Why can't we just say it's, Mrs. Smith's class, or it's the butterfly classroom, or whatever it might be in terms of what the rest of the school uses? Why can't, that autistic class, or why can't that class use the same, I suppose, terminology? And then I suppose labels such as high and low functioning are no longer preferred by the community. And we know this because, terms like high functioning, which may relate to people who, neurotypical people may see as, being able to drive a car, being able to, hold down a job, being able to, access school, university, etc., deemed as high functioning because they're more seen as, neurotypically externally presenting members of society, and someone who's low functioning who may not, I suppose, be able to, attend school in the same way, who may not be able to have those other milestones that maybe their peers or their siblings may meet. Doesn't mean that that person isn't having a very happy and content life, And then I suppose underneath that, then, instead of saying verbal and non-verbal, we now say speaking and non-speaking, and to describe a person's communication style. So somebody who has historically been described as being non-verbal, made what we would have called a different communication style. So they may use a combination of spoken words, they may use, AAC devices. And that's a valid way of being able to communicate and interact with the world and with their peers as well. Labeling someone as nonverbal, contributes to society's tendency to dismiss non-speakers instead of exploring ways for that person to communicate. And I suppose lastly then, terms like challenging behavior or disruptive behavior, focuses more on the impact of that person's distress and how that impacts the rest of other people, rather than that person's internalized experience themselves. We prefer terms such as dysregulated and meltdown as a lot more, I suppose, person-centered approach as well. I suppose just then in conclusion, like I mentioned before, our language reflects how we perceive neurodiversity and disability, and we can help shape perspectives by embracing neurodivergence as part of human diversity, using language that celebrates differences rather than stigmatizing them. And, we aren't looking to shame people as such either, but as I mentioned before, the more we know, the more we do. And it's just so important to be able to role model language as a very first step to being more neuro-affirmative in society.
Super. Thank you,
Okay, that's
Jack.
me.
Yeah, perfect. We're going to just stop sharing now and have a bit of a chat. And if anybody wants to put questions or thoughts they might have into the chat, we'll be able to deal with them at this point before we do our next presentation. So I'm just going to turn the camera around now to our panel. And one of the main themes coming out of Jack's talk there is the language, power of language, I suppose. For us, like, we have a language and values guide that we have cobbled together from lots of different sources. One of them being Davida, your excellent autism assessment handbook, which I've I want to be your agent to sell it, because I think it should be really renamed the Neurodiversity Bible. It really is a powerful source of help for anybody who's, especially teachers, anybody who works with or for or in the sphere of neurodiversity, because it's really like a go-to guide for being neuro-affirmative. And the language really is so important for us. And it's not about shaming anybody or, calling people out for making mistakes or anything like that. Like, nobody's going around and banging people on the head with your book. It's just, if you stand back and think about your language and how, if you can align it with the people that you're talking about, then immediately you're making a huge difference in their lives. One of my favorite lines from a movie that I think I was like forced to watch at 5 o'clock one morning, and it seemed really intense to me at the time, but probably any movie would be, was from, I think it's Orion in the Dark, and the animal that was talking was saying that, like, so much of how we see ourselves is through the eyes of others. And it just really hit me that, our self-esteem is mostly built on how other people interact with us and how other people talk to us and about us, and whether they like us and all of that. The language part for me is so powerful, because instead of, as you said, Jack, like the kids that are over there in that ASD unit, like ASD for a start, it's 3 letters, and you're confining your child or those children to an acronym. For me, it's really dehumanizing, it's depersonalizing. And the unit, it's not a unit, as you said, it's a classroom. They're kids and they're going to school, same as any other, they're in a classroom. Why don't we just call it, Mrs. Murphy's class? Or, as you said, if the other classes all have a name, call it that. Mm-hmm. But it's, for me, it's the first most powerful free tool that everyone has in their box to kind of, become more neurodivergent. Davida, I throw it up to you there, how you think about that.
Yeah. I think that there's so many. I could talk for hours on just language alone, because I think it's such an important topic. And I think on one hand, there's so many people that genuinely don't know. Like, I used ASD for years. I look back on old file notes, or even my first book has autism, has ASD all over it. So on one hand, lots of people genuinely don't know. This the neurodiversity affirmative movement and paradigm is actually very new. It's not new. How long have we been talking? Maybe 2 years, 1 year. Yeah. And also, it's actually in a really good, I'm really proud of Ireland in this way, but actually Ireland is way ahead of any other country in this area. It's become a pocket of really good neuro-affirmative practice, and all these researchers, I get contacted by all these researchers and professionals saying they want supervision or just to link in with other neuro-affirmative people in Ireland because of all the good work we're doing. So it's absolutely brilliant. But I suppose just to say that, if any of you listening are still using ASD, loads of people are. Like, it's like Jack said in his, when you know, before you know, what's the phrase?
Know better, you do better.
When you know better, you do better. So, and then I think on another another important point is that people get very afraid about language. So they get very afraid, I'm going to use the wrong language. And for years, like, we've been doing this now, we've been really embedded in this for years. So we find it easier to use the, say, correct language or the right language, but also language changes over time. And some of the language that we use now won't be okay in 2 or 3 years. Like, there was a time when special needs was considered, okay, kind and okay. Yes. So I suppose it's a balance in between being easy on yourself and not afraid. And actually, this forum is a really good, these kind of forums are really good in terms of asking questions. Like, if there's any language that you're using at the moment that you want to ask, like, this is a safe space in terms of us helping you out with it. But there are, for example, language guides, like the Neurodiversity Ireland language guide is really good. But it's the same it's the exact same in terms of if you're thinking about race or sexuality. There's loads of words that we used around race and sexuality that were okay, that aren't okay now. And it's just about, if you're working in this area, it's really important that whatever area you're working in or just living in, that you're up to date with the language and using the right language. And it does really, and then on the other point, I'm being all understanding about people using this language, but also it is actually really important as well to learn and to use the language that's respectful to the community. I suppose that's the thing. It's what language is respectful to that community, and using that language is really, really important. And even from a personal perspective, I would have known myself professionally, because obviously I've worked with autistic and neurodivergent and ADHD people my whole life. But it's only relatively recently that I myself figured out that I'm ADHD and that I have a wide range of neurodivergence in my family, including autistic experience and ADHD experience. And it's funny how now when people use that language, it feels different now that I'm part of that community and my children are part of that community. It actually is very hurtful, like it, and then I have to put my professional hat on and say, oh, well, actually, maybe this is the term to use, but I can feel my emotions rising. So, from a personal perspective, it actually does cause pain, the language.
That's the bit that I'm want to focus on that with you, Davida, because you come from it from both personal and professional point of view, right? And you've got that, I feel like I'm punched in the tummy every time somebody says I have autism. I'm autistic. I don't have a disease. I am autistic.
Yeah.
But then I get met with professionals who will say, well, oh, really sorry, Nessa, but we have to say you're ASD or you have autism spectrum disorder because that's what it says in the DSM-5, right? Yeah. So that's, in order for, say, for example, for us to market a college course, or for us to get help from XYZ, I'm going to have to call it autism spectrum disorder. Yeah. And I feel like, we need people like you, high profile professionals, but also everyone on the ground to just say, I don't need to say what it says in the DSM-5 because it's really horrible. It should be set on fire anyway. But
true. No, we don't. I mean, for example, so obviously we do autism assessments, identifications in the children's clinic and the adult autism practice. But what we do is we use autistic. I'm going to even say we've even moved on from using autism. This is next level, but we try not to use autism alone as a thing, but that's whole next level, because autism doesn't exist by itself. It's like womanhood, it's like there are autistic people, there are autistic experiences. Anyway, I shouldn't have even brought that in now.
It's not floating out there.
It's not floating. Yeah, it's autistic people, autistic experience. So we use autistic or ADHD or, the preference of the community throughout. But where it has to say, the line that we have is in there, we say meets the DSM-5 criteria for autism. And we've never had any issues with that. There's absolutely no need. The only place that where we have to go back into medical model and that kind of language is in, for example, reasonable accommodations letters or disability supports. We sometimes do have to write separate letters where it's all the awful stuff. But what we do is we talk with the clients and we say, look, this is awful. We're so sorry. But if you want this, we're going to have to put in this language here. But it's very that's a very, very specific thing. Yeah. So I think the thing is that professionals think, I don't know, even my whole entire professional life, I thought, okay, this is the way, in Ireland, we're great at doing what we're told. We're not like the French going out, striking and protesting. Our kind of natural, and being an educational psychologist, I don't know, we're very nice. We follow what we're told. We think these are the things that we're supposed to do in our careers, and these are the things that we're supposed to do in order to access that. But you'd be amazed how few of those things are actually true. When you actually don't do it, and you actually just say, well, no, this is actually based on this current research. I don't agree with this. This is how this is going to go. And everyone goes, okay.
I think you can't underestimate the impact of like little ripples. So even if you're just aware and someone says ASD and you just say, look, did you know there's a whole new thing about that now? Let me guide you over to Neurodiversity Ireland's language guide. And I think you can't underestimate yourself as being powerful in this, even just to build awareness in a group, in a staff room, at a training, and those little ripples then get kind of shared out amongst our society, and then things change. So it is important, we were talking about shame and things, and you don't want to shame someone, but you do want to create change and awareness. And so just by speaking about it, if all you take away from this morning is actually the next time you hear ASD or UNET that you say, things are changing, that will create great change, I think.
And I have to give some kind of positive feedback from the Department of Education. Actually, we met them this week, and they're fans of our language guide as well too, and they've promised that they will be updating their language this year. I'll believe that when I see it, but I think the mood is there. It is there to the move is to respect the community that you're talking about. And just because they're children, or they're in, you know, they're in early years education, or they're in primary school, or whatever part of the education system they're in, it doesn't mean we don't, you know, apply the same type of respectful approach. And one of the questions that's come up is, you know, the other types of neurodivergence that still have disorder in it. So I'm ADHD as well. I think it's a horrible name because it doesn't describe at all what goes on in my head. And I know there's a move towards a better terminology for it, but something like DCD or DLD, I don't want to even say them because I hate them so much. There are better ways of saying it, and you know, for anybody who's interested, we do give alternatives in our language guide, and that hopefully will be something that would be taken up by the department, because we have a problem where we have these horrible reports, not from the children's clinic, but from like the AON providers who are, you know, just, you know, coming in for a minute and giving us these horrible reports that say all sorts of horrible things, like your child has rigid repetitive interests, or is obsessed with X, or has no social skills, or all the lovely things. And we're told, well, you need those to get support from school. But I'd love to know that the schools and the teachers and the educators and the staff all would be willing to say, well, I don't need to hear that. I need to hear about what support they need, what they find challenging, what are their strengths. You know, how do they present as an autistic person in school? You know, what can I do? I don't know what your thoughts are about those other kind of disorders that are still out there.
Yeah, it's very hard because the autistic community has been a lot more vocal and a lot more organized, and for a lot longer. So actually, when we've started to do ADHD identification in our adult practice, and so obviously I've been doing a lot of research into ADHD community. But well, the ADHD is different because it's very much wedded still to the medical community because of its link to medication. So it's actually very hard to find neurodiversity affirmative or any kind of, it's very, very hard to find professionals or organizations doing neurodiversity affirmative work in the other areas. But there's loads of people now talking about neurodiversity in general, though. There's loads of great work, and I wish, I have terrible word finding. ADHD. I have terrible word finding because I'm even now thinking there's great. I read a really great article on LinkedIn. Do you know what? I'll find it and I'll send it. You can share it in the chat. Who talks about like what you were talking about, overlapping, because there's so much overlap that probably in the future there isn't going to be these very distinct autistic ADHD. In the future it's going to be different. So there's a lot of people in the more talking about neurodiversity in neuroaffirmative ways. So I would hope that those names would be changed in the future, but we're probably further off than we hope with autistic people.
Joan, sorry, you wanted to come in there on this?
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
How you doing? I suppose I'm coming from the education perspective, and I've just been writing lots of notes as the conversation has been going on. So let me see if I can come to them all in a slight order. I suppose first of all with ASD, of course that D stands for disorder, and if we're taking a neurodiversity perspective, well then there isn't such a thing as disorder. There are people whose needs aren't being met. So some people who didn't survive the school system, the work system, the social system, went and got a label of ASD or DCD or ADHD. In other words, it's saying, this is how you don't fit into society, instead of saying, this is how society isn't meeting your needs. And so meeting needs is what the neurodiversity paradigm is all about. And just to go on to that a little bit as well, and particularly, I think Jack mentioned that in his talk, that neurodiversity is situated politically. And it certainly is. And we can see from countries across the water at the moment, if DEI is being eliminated, in other words, if meeting people's needs who don't fit is being eliminated, then who do we choose? Who is the person whose needs are going to be met? So I've also noticed in terms of neurodiversity, there's a lot of fuss over neurodivergent, neurodiversity, and the language was used badly in the beginning. The way I remember it is if you remove the word neuro and then take diverse, divergent, typical, it makes sense. It's the easiest way to remember. But nonetheless, the words were used badly because industry took over what was a philosophy, a paradigm that came from autistic people. So industry wanted to retain the bright autistic people who they couldn't retain. And so then neurodiversity meant bright people who weren't functioning in industry, instead of meaning we all have unique brains. And it includes learning disabled, it includes acquired brain injury, it may even include queerness, but neurodiversity is the fact that we all have different brains. And yet it was taken over from, Davida mentioned that the autistic community have been very strong in the neurodiversity movement. And I suppose it's because it started there. It didn't actually start with Judy Singer. She was the first person to put it into a formal document. She put it into her thesis. But there was the INLV list. It was a list where autistic people met for the first time online. And terms were being, well, thoughts were being thrown around there, and language grew into the words around neurodiversity. But now it's been taken over by industry rather than being owned by everybody. So when in the poll about who's neurotypical, who is neurotypical? You're neurotypical when you're in a situation where your needs are met. And so you may not always be neurotypical, and you don't have to have a label to not be neurotypical. I was a CNO for 10 years, and I'd often be getting in reports for kids who had lots of needs, but because the needs didn't have a disorderly label, we, back in those days, couldn't give them extra supports. And it was the needs was the most important thing. And neurodiversity is all about the fact that humans have different needs and meeting the needs of the humans. Sorry, that was a monologue rather than a conversation. The joys of being at a distance. Anyway.
That was really powerful, Joan. I think that's hit like a really important point. Davida, if you want to jump in.
Yeah. Thank you, Joan. I was enraptured listening to everything you were saying there, and completely 100% agree. It reminded me of something that I wanted to say in response to what you said, Nessa, about reports, and that it is all about, there's absolutely no need for anybody's reports, and I'm not just talking about psychologists, I'm also talking about teachers. There's no need to use these terms like repetitive. What does it even mean, repetitive restricted interest, obsessed with, blah, blah, blah. That what's really important is that obviously you mentioned strengths, but then you mention needs, but that can be done in it's all about taking the judgment and value away from what you're saying. So instead of, your child is obsessed with dinosaurs. Your child loved playing with dinosaurs for the 2 hours. You're taking away the judgment. You're just saying factually. So in terms of advocating for a child's needs, because I think it's really important to say that this isn't all about saying nobody has needs, nobody needs support. Not at all. I think it's a common myth around the neurodiversity affirmative movement that it's all about this nonsense, like autism is a superpower, all this kind of stuff. Whereas it's not about that. Everybody has their own strengths and challenges. It's just taking about the value and judgment away from it, and instead saying, this is what the child needs. The child needs someone to check in on them a few times a day to see if they're okay. The child needs movement breaks. So it's just about saying it factually, what the child needs. And actually that's much more helpful for teachers, because that's a literal, okay, this is what I need to do, rather than them thinking, oh, there's a problem in this area and I need to figure out the solution.
And it really becomes child-centered then.
Yeah.
Then you move away from this idea that there's some kind of homogenous group of autistic people who, don't feel empathy and can't learn unless it's in a visual way, or, all those kind of generalizations that have been made that aren't really helpful to anybody,
And you want to balance it with the observation of the strengths, and actually in a genuine way, what can this person offer the classroom, or what this person has huge individual strengths, and what are they, rather than just what is all the disorder and the deficit, what's the value of their depth of knowledge on the dinosaurs? Can they teach the rest of the class this? And so it's like embracing that in a very sort of genuine way, I think, to not just be very one-sided, to look at support needs, what actually, how do we counterbalance that with all the great strengths, and otherwise we're kind of blinkered to that, aren't we? If we're just looking at a report of deficits, we kind of then only see that, whereas we want to just balance that with of what can this child bring to the table, because everybody has something, and it's our duty to figure that out, I think.
This kind of like ideological I suppose question that the Department of Education are now asking themselves, what is inclusion, and is it having the differentiated curriculum and the reports that mean the kids have identify their needs, and then very much in that kind of sectioned off approach that you've got the run-of-the-mill class body, and then you've got the additional needs? Or does it mean thinking about the kids' needs, all of the kids' needs at every possible stage of the planning for that class? Like for me, it feels like a no-brainer, that obviously you have a third of your classroom who are neurodivergent, maybe more. Most of them are not going to be identified. Therefore, if you're thinking about how to include as many people as possible, like in every single thing that you do, whether it's how you design your bathroom, to what flooring you have, to what do your chairs look like, to can everybody read, does somebody need an AAC device, does somebody need a C pen? If you're thinking with the widest possible lens, and you're hurting nobody, but you're helping to include as many as possible.
Yeah,
Neuro-affirmative.
That's being neuro-affirmative, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Just tell me
exactly.
that.
Yeah. Well, I think it was on a more scarier note to educators. I think it was Pete Warmby that I saw talking about this, and he was saying, they were asking what needs to change in schools, and he was saying, well, I really hate to say this and no one wants to hear it, but basically there needs to be a complete overhaul of our entire education system. You know, this coming in and sitting in a classroom for 5-6 hours, you know, it just is an absolute hell for majority of neurodivergent
And that's hard for
kids.
all kids, not
Exactly,
just
exactly.
neurodivergent kids.
And I think the thing is that most of them are hiding it. Like one of my children only said this morning that school is an absolute nightmare if he doesn't, sit through it. So
Wow.
yeah, exactly.
So you've got the kids who sit through it, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got kids who I know very well who won't sit through anything that's uncomfortable.
Yeah, which is it's a better, I should say, I would like you to tell me that more often, because actually it's a little bit healthier if you're letting us know, rather than, it's actually very damaging. There's a huge, I should say this is a really important point for educators, because it happens all the time that you hear, oh, but she or he seems absolutely fine in school, they're absolutely fine, there's no problem. But with parents and psychologists and therapists see in the background is the damage that is happening for that children is actually almost worse than the children who are,
Davida, and I
running
can
about.
speak to that of last week. The comment was, I'm a terrible child. I'm not the child that everyone expects me to be. I'm really awful. I want to die.
Yeah.
And that's been the, kind of a recurring theme from 3. So I think like people, they really need to understand when we're saying that the kid is anxious.
Yes, exactly. Even though you don't see it, I think there's a weird thing around distrust, kind of distrust. Not everybody, but I think I've seen a lot of the time that there can sometimes be a distrust of maybe parents or professionals, and also a feeling that, oh, everybody, everybody's neurodivergent these days, or that child isn't autistic, that child isn't ADHD, they're absolutely fine. But I think it's just really, really important that all educators know that it is very, very typical for someone who's neurodivergent to sit in a classroom and you won't see anything all day. But actually, they really are in distress. And at home, all those factors really are there at home and in a different environment. And it is possible. I think before we didn't know that. We kind of thought, oh, if someone is autistic, you're going to see the autism. You're definitely going to see it. But
And that brings us to the question about not being able to go to school. Okay, so like it's a hot topic this morning. It's in the news. People are writing about this more and more often because there's this crisis and non-attendance, and loads of it is blamed on COVID. I have a controversial idea that maybe parents are beginning to listen more and understand more when a kid is anxious, to the point of, for example, pulling all their hair out, or pulling all their fingernails off, or pulling their skin off their lips. I'm not exaggerating. That those are the kind of things the parents are going to say, well, you know what, I'm not going to force you to do that. And if you're saying, I'm not going to school, I'm not going to grab you by the hair and drag you into the classroom. I'm going to respect that. I'm going to listen. I'm going to try and find out what is it that's going on. And probably a really greater understanding of demand avoidance and how it hurt, and how when you expose somebody to demands who isn't able for it, that you're hurting them and causing harm.
So important.
Joan, sorry, do you want to jump in there and then we'll...
Oh, sorry. Masking is just such a huge thing, and can lead into school avoidance. I'm autistic as well as being a school teacher, so I work independently with students, and I have to ask everybody around the child after we've done something, how were they afterwards? Because even I can't see it. Masking is such a strong response to people who are just trying to get through, who are feeling under threat. And really, masking needs to be one of the primary things we're looking at when we're supporting people who are autistic. Nessa's the one person there in the chat who mentioned it, not this Nessa, or the other Nessa in the chat. And I want to go back to something that Nessa mentioned, because Nessa mentioned about language, that behaviors of concern versus extreme dysregulation. And so the masking children are the ones who are internalizing all their school distress. The students who are experiencing extreme regulation are the ones who are showing it out there. And so obviously the better language is to look at extreme dysregulation, but we can see it in the children who are showing what might have been determined before as behaviors of concern. How do we see it in the other children? It requires enormous homeschool communication and trust, and even fake trust when you don't really feel it, so you can all together get the big picture. Because we often have to fake trust, because as teachers, you've got so many agendas, you've got the curriculum, you've got the principal, you've got the parents' expectations, you've got the other kids in the class. You have to in some way try and meet people where they're at and understand where they're at to try and support those children, and including those children themselves. What's their language of stress? What's their language of happy? What's their language of complete avoidance? I know I'm a complete dissociator, so nobody sees in me when I'm completely stressed, but it all comes out afterwards.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything that you said there. And I think the trust piece is really important, actually, because even when I started working in the HSE years ago, like 20 years ago, I remember there was a kind of atmosphere of distrust around parents, and you would have heard maybe, oh, they're looking for, I don't use diagnosis, but looking for a diagnosis, you know, oh, and it's parenting and they're looking for a diagnosis. And when I think back now, I think, oh my God, all those children were autistic and their parents were also autistic. You know, and they were coming in with folders of, you know, it's like we always know when someone's autistic because they come in with the folder of why I might be autistic. It's like, yep, we can identify that without even going through the whole thing. But what one of the main shifts for me is I have just decided, you know what, I'm going to trust parents. And it hasn't let me down. It really hasn't let me down. You know, obviously, not everybody that comes in is autistic. You know, obviously, sometimes people think their child is autistic and they're not, or ADHD, or, you know, any of the others. But the vast majority of the time, if you really trust parents, they really are the ones that know their parents, the children best. They have their children's best interests at heart. They love their children. They're not wanting them to put them through some process or that's not going to be good for them. So, you know, I think trusting, and I think the fake it till you make it, actually, you know, the faking it actually is a really good way of thinking. I hadn't ever thought about it that way, but there is some times where I've gone, I'm actually just going to have to try. I didn't see any autistic experience whatsoever, because that happens a lot in our assessment work, that we won't see it. You know, so we're just going to we have to trust the parent report and also, you know, the teacher report, you know. So but anyway, it's never gone wrong. In time, those children are all very obviously autistic within, you know, a few years.
Yeah. And I think it kind of comes from a good place in teachers. I think they kind of, our school staff, I think they want to see, oh, Jimmy did really well today. You know, he's able to do it in school today, but they don't see the kind of what's going on behind the scenes. It's like the classic swan, is it? And then they're like, it's like it's not a swan, it's a duck. And they're pedaling away really fast under the surface. And it's really hard for us because of things like you've got to see it to believe it. And because you know, a lot of what we do is kind of based on observation of behavior, and actually we do not know, and part of the double empathy theory, which we will probably go on to talk about, we do not know anybody else's experience or their internal of what's going on, and we have to like start from that point of view, that my experience is totally different to your experience, and how I show emotion or my distress is going to be totally different to yours at all times. So you've got to start with the fact that you actually don't know very much at all, and you're there to learn, and with curiosity, I think, and an open mind. And just because you just don't see something, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I think another part of that, or maybe it's like the other side of the coin, is where the teachers and I know this will say, like, I can see they're autistic, as in I can totally see what, you know, the way they present in my classroom, but I can't raise it with the parent, because anytime I've like remotely suggested, they've been like, oh God, no, what are you talking about? You know, I don't see that at all, or they're not willing to maybe have a conversation about it. Or maybe even worse is that if the kid is autistic and they're saying, absolutely don't even mention it or tell anybody or tell him or tell her, that maybe, you know, also I think, is there a part of it that there's loads of parents floating around out there that are neurodivergent and don't maybe realize it themselves? Is that a part of it? I don't know, but there definitely is a problem for teachers who have that. Like there's, you know, there's a part of every classroom that's not identified and never will be.
Yes, sorry. I mean, there is that flip side. We also, you know, lots of the times teachers are seeing it and parents aren't ready. I think there's two different things that are usually going on. Oftentimes the parents are neurodivergent themselves, and so their children is the same as them. So they see it as normal, and it is normal. It's normal within their family. So the teacher is probably coming saying, I have these concerns for your child. And the parents saying, well, I don't have concerns. They're brilliant. You know, I was just like that as a child. And they're right. They were just like, they are brilliant, you know? So that can happen. And then also, obviously, there's such society now, it's getting better. It's certainly getting better. I find that a lot more parents are open to, like, we're seeing a lot of parents coming into the adult autism practice whose children have been identified. And now they're realizing it, but they're coming in a positive way. It's a good thing. They're saying, I want to understand my child more. And now I realize, but there is still a societal stigma around a lot of these things.
And does it come down to environments as well? So like in the school environment, this comes out, but actually at home, there's no kind of, there's no stress, there's no differences, because actually the children feel safe, and it's coming down to safe environments for people. And so if people feel safe, if kids feel safe, we don't see dysregulation, or we don't see as much of those sorts of more neurodivergent type presentations, you know what I mean?
So Julie, it comes to environment. And so then if we're like, the reason our children have gone to get the label in the first place is because eventually somebody convinces the parent, or the parent notices in the first case, that the child isn't thriving in school, and yet they know that the child wants to learn. So what's the problem? The problem is not the child. The problem is the school and the school environment, and the teacher who really wants to work with that child and can't do what they want to do because there's too many in the class, or they need extra support, or the class is too noisy, or whatever. So it's our environments. Our environments are not meeting the needs of our children. Therefore, our children are needing to get labels. Maybe they wouldn't need the label otherwise. So if we're taking the neuro-affirmative, neurodiversity perspective, all brains are good brains, and our schools aren't meeting the needs of many of our children. And so they're coming to us for supports, for assessments, for alternative education. That's what's wrong.
Yeah. And I think there are changes, right? I think that could sound like, oh my God, we're never going, like, this is never going to work. The environment is never going to be right. But I think there actually are changes that all schools can make, and actually are making, whether or not they're being supported by, you know, the centralized government, which they should be, but I'm not sure they are. But I think there's loads of schools that are going out there saying, do you know what, we can do X, Y, and Z. And Jack can speak to this at the end if we have time. And we also can do this in a more in detail version as well too, a pre-recorded one on how to make schools more inclusive, and loads of the things are so available. And I'm going to say the first one is a mindset shift. The first one is to think there's nothing wrong with this kid, and here's the things I can do to better understand neurodiversity. And the second one is looking at the environment and saying, okay, like those bells that go off every 15 minutes or every hour, whatever it is, I can't remember, it's been so long, they send me like my nervous system goes on fire, or you know, the chairs grating along the lovely cleanable floor, or like, you know, you're kind of coming at my, you know, the blackboard with your nails, like it's I'm
holding on to my fingernails.
I suppose as well for schools, like, it is a journey. I suppose an awful lot of time you're speaking with like principals or teachers, people often want a quick fix. How can we fix the situation? How can we make things, you know, I suppose, easy from here on out? And, you know, oftentimes when we recommend strategies or environmental changes or whatever, you know, things do take a while to set in, embed into you know, routine or whatever. So it is, consistency is key with an awful lot of these things as well. And I do often think that, you know, like everyone's mentioned before, like the environment is definitely the first thing should definitely change within the school. And an awful lot of these changes don't just support this one kid, they'll support every kid. You know, movement breaks, like we always mention, movement breaks aren't just for the kids that need movement, because every kid needs movement. So all these are, you know, universal strategies that will help everybody, not just one or two kids in the class.
And then coming back to that question that somebody asked about, you know, the parents not being willing to accept. So if you're making these universal changes, and we can point to resources like at the end of this of where you can find advice on our own information as well. But if you're making those universal changes, you're going to make it more comfortable for the kid who isn't identified, or whose parents are unwilling to help with that process, or whatever is going on there. Because teachers want to know some like concrete advice for how to deal with that particular challenge about the parent who's unwilling. And I think for me, it's partly our job to remove the stigma. And obviously schools are doing that as well. But is there anything else that you would say, like with that parent who's like, you know, point blank, not not going to,
Yeah.
you know.
Isn't it about the relationship you have with the like building that safe relationship first with that parent? Like it's very different going in and like if you have a sort of strained relationship with someone and saying, okay, I think your child has ASD, say for example, but actually if you build up a positive relationship with that parent and are mindful of how you're framing what you've observed and neutralize it, like Davida was saying, like neutralize your language. Look, I've noticed that when the bell goes off, that's really tricky for your child, or sitting for a really long, they benefit from like having a movement, and I notice that helps them to learn more, or that you're making kind of neutral observations of what's happening in the classroom, what supports you're putting in, and what that might mean, rather than these are the deficits, this is what's going wrong, and that sort of tragedy narrative of, oh my goodness, there's a really big deficit and really big problem here, because that is terrifying for parents. So, I mean, to hear their child has issues, or there's a difficulty, or there's something wrong with their child, but actually if you sort of neutralize it and talk about it in a more positive way, in a more observational way, and a non-judgmental way, it might help. I don't know if you've anything to add.
Yeah, no, it was exactly what I was going to say. I think that if you come at it not with these are my concerns, just I think exactly the positive, the good relationship is really, really key. And then just coming at it again, like you said earlier, from kind of a curiosity, a kind of warm curiosity that you as a teacher care about the child, and you've noticed these things, and you kind of think, God, you've seen some talks from autistic people, you've done a talk with Neurodiversity Ireland, you saw Joan online, you saw, whatever, like, and you heard these things, and you're thinking, that like some of those, you don't have to use this kind of language, but basically some of those bits of autistic, some of what I've seen in the classes aligns with autistic experience. And what do you think about that? I find sometimes that if you now, I know that that it's not all about the people who are really successful, but I find sometimes with parents at the beginning of the journey to talk to them about some of the, there's loads of autistic teachers, there's loads of autistic lawyers, there's, look at this person, look at that person, not in that tone of voice, but, to kind of really, really get across the point that, you think that their child, if they really feel that you have the child's best interest at heart and that you really like the child, then I think they're going to be much more responsive. You're not coming at it from, I think that I have all these worries about the child.
And we're never going to be able to support them.
We're never going to be able to support them. Yeah, exactly.
Like framing it in a way that, having this identification will help your child understand their brain, understand their body. And we've got a list of books that, schools can use in the classroom, even talk about how different brains work, how different bodies work, how different learning kind of styles are. I think just having that done at a class level and getting kids start identified with it themselves as well. So maybe they might be going home and say, Mom, I read this book today. I kind of identify with the kangaroo, or identify with the elephant, or whatever kind of it might be. It just opens up so much more conversation, and take that shaming element that we keep on mentioning about as well. And I think just normalizing it as much as possible from as early as age as possible, rather than it being this big, that person in the corner is in the back. Is this not just actually any of us?
Yeah, I definitely think
Sorry, I was going to just throw in here about the LEANS program. So it's learning about neurodiversity at school, and it's for 8 to 11-year-olds, and it involves a parental component as well. And it's just a lovely program that's free to download for anybody online, that works at a whole class level, where the class learn about everybody in the class being different, and also everybody in the class having needs, and everybody in the class having a responsibility to support each other. And it's got, I suppose, 3 main themes behind it: to know a little bit about the fact we're all different, to think about what you might be able to do, to think about what you might be able to do, but the think bit, let me say that again: know, think, and do. So the know part, knowing about difference, not necessarily conditions. Maybe people are a certain way because they're autistic, maybe people are a certain way because they're dyslexic, maybe people are a certain way because tough things are happening at home. To do what we do about it, but the think part is the strongest piece, that attitude piece, that attitude that it isn't us and them, that neurodiversity is all of us. And so it's a really nice program to run. And then after that, if you're looking at parents that, your child's differences are so definite in the class that it might be useful for them to get maybe some extra supports, I wonder, would it be worthwhile having a full report to see how they are at home in school, and seeing if they actually fit any criteria for anything that has a label at the moment. or maybe that we can write down what their needs are. So that kind of thing can be very useful. So if somebody's looking for the name in the chat box, it's called LEANS, L-E-A-N-S, which in a weird way,
we'll link
you
that.
just share it afterwards.
Yeah, we'll link that
Yeah.
because we're real fans of LEANS, and also have to say the NCSE's Relate framework. I find it really good. Like it's one of the focuses for Relate is making that connection. So like you know we won't get into it, but you know the guidelines on restraint and seclusion, which aren't lovely, and that topic is not lovely at all. But one of the ways that we think, you know, that you can avoid that ever being a part of your daily classroom experience is, like, if you really live and implement Relate, you're looking at a safe person for the child, and that's like who they really like, who they really trust. And you'd hate that your kid is going to school and doesn't have one person in the whole school that they don't really love or like or get on with, or, you know, really want to or really can connect with. And the connection part, and making sure they're connected to their classroom and they have other kids there that they can connect with. And that is the like foundational part for like the kind of whole school, the whole school approach to like learning as well too, you know. So LEANS and Relate will link afterwards.
Great. Yeah. And relationship,
yeah.
relationship is so huge. Sorry, Davida. Yes.
Yeah, and that falls into the pyramid of learning, it's called. So we can send a link into the chat as well. So it's like you just said, our child needs to feel regulated and safe before we can look at any of the other, I suppose, components of being able to go to school. So, you know, like academic learning, handwriting, they're all, if we're thinking of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like a direct comparison. So your bottom needs need to be filled first, which is the one about feeling safe and connected and all that. I suppose it's really important to know that, you know, everybody's, you know, hardwired for connection. Neurodivergent people are the exact same. They may not, I suppose, socialize or interact in the same way that neurotypical people do, but everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants to feel like they have the community, and everybody wants to, there's that us versus them. Nobody wants to be on the them side. Everybody wants to be on the us side. It is really important, like you said, to have that person that is there for trust and, I suppose, safety.
And that reminds me also, when you've just said that about the basic needs being met, that when you have kids coming into school, that's probably one of the first things that you have to do. We get asked all the time, like, what about the kid that's coming in from home really dysregulated for whatever reason? And the first thing to do is make sure, like, have they eaten? Have they been to the toilet? Do they know that they need to go to the toilet? To make them feel really safe and as comfortable as possible. Like, we couldn't do this webinar without all having had a coffee first. You know, what's the equivalent to the kids' cup of coffee? Have they had enough time? I'm not suggesting drinking coffee. Have they had enough time to do something that they really, you know, can get lost in, that they're really passionate about or comfortable doing, before you're asking them then to start doing maths? Because if you know, if I came down here and my husband asked me to do an equation, I would like, I'd probably have a violent reaction to that. So, you know, it's that kind of like, you can look at the whole bottom tier first and do a lot of work and do a lot of kind of like helping there. And that's, again, it's costless, it's easy, and it's kind of basic before you have to do anything in particular.
And you kind of like, that's kind of foundational, isn't it? Like, I think there's this like, I mean, I'm not a teacher, so apologies if this offends any teachers, but like, it's kind of, there's kind of a thing about education that it's all about the curriculum and the learning and the whatever topics you are doing, but actually that is nothing without those foundational pieces. Like, and actually going to, like, a lot of parents that come to see me with their kids, their goals for school are that their child is content and progressing for whatever that means to them. You know, it's not about learning things, it's about being content within themselves and being able to progress for themselves. So it doesn't mean we don't have goals for them, but actually that we're looking at what that means for that individual child, really.
Yeah. Jonah, I don't know whether you want to do your presentation at this stage.
I should throw it in there.
Yeah, work away.
Throw it into the mix. Okay. And again, if people want, I suppose, hop in here because we're running low on time, they certainly can. So I started off with what it does mean to be neurodivergent, which we have been talking about already, because for me, neurodiversity means we all take in, process, and then release whatever or react to respond to the environment in different ways. And the reason I have two people in that picture, one is me a few years ago, and the other is my brother John. And the reason we're here is because John would have been assessed as being autistic long before me. He didn't even get a proper assessment because it was back in the 70s. He spent 2 days in school in his life before he got expelled for his behavior. And he has learning needs. He at this stage still doesn't know about footpaths and traffic on the roads. So that's his level of need. And this was just a campaign for As I Am a couple of years ago. So one loves shiny things, one doesn't usually notice. So he's the one who notices shiny. I miss all that. One is a teacher, one doesn't know what school is. One loves a spin in the car, one gets travel sick and she's the driver. One trains people about autism, one never heard of it. So it's just looking at that whole difference around neurodiversity involving all of us, because sometimes, again, thanks to industry, we think that neurodiversity is only the clever ones who'll get jobs if only they got the right supports. Neurodiversity is a human rights issue. Everybody deserves supports. And the medical people who have defined what's wrong with us are beginning to recognise this. So Professor Jonathan Green in the UK, who's been really strongly involved with CAMS there, he has written recently to say, we are at a time of unparalleled flux in our understanding of what autism is and how to respond to it. And he also says most interventions in current use have no good evidence of effectiveness. That was in 2023. And I know this talk is about neurodiversity and I'm focusing a bit on autism, but I'm going to broaden it out a little bit as well. So because medical people were looking at people who were different from the outside and saying how they didn't correspond to others, that's where we had an issue. So I'm going to look at a different lens here, and it's a lens that was developed by autistic people, which is the lens of the use of attention and focus in autism. Sorry, I'm just starting my timer, I forgot, to make sure I don't go over. So how autistic people pay attention to things has changed completely how we look at autism. It was developed by these three people. They wrote about it in a paper in 2005, which appeared in the journal Autism, but they were all very independent, very idiosyncratic people, and they weren't attached to any university, although they were all working with universities. And so they developed what they called the theory of monotropism. So why am I talking about one neurodevelopmental difference when we could talk about lots? We'll come to that. And so if you know how we pay attention monotropically, then you can relate to us, then you can teach us. The person in the middle, Wen Lawson, is the only one who's still alive and still talking about it lots. Dinah Murray on the left was the main author. Mike Lester on the right was another author on the paper. So what was monotropism? It's a big word, and I wish they had picked an easier word. But basically it says the mind uses all of its attention, all of its processing resources and attention to focus on one or a few things rather than spreading its attention around. And that to me is the core of being autistic. So whatever we notice, we pay attention to, that's the stuff that takes up our attention. And when we do that when we're very small, that forms our concept base for the world. So it can lead to intense special interests experienced in a deep and compelling way. So the stuff that we love, we really love it. But some autistic people don't have special interests, but our level of attention, how we pay attention, we're either paying full attention or we're not. And that makes it difficult to focus on other things. So back in the early 2000s, back when autism was considered as only as this medical thing is being wrong with you, they aligned it with what was written in the manuals. And at the manuals they had at the time, the triad of impairments, the triad of things that were wrong with you because you were autistic. You were wrong in communication, you were wrong in social understanding, and you were wrong in terms of restrictive repetitive behaviors. And they were able to explain all of that using monotropism. But a couple of years later, Fergus, the son of one of the original authors, he took a more of a neurodiversity perspective on this. He thought, well, what do autistic people think autism is? And can that be explained using monotropism? Again, monotropism, the mind uses all of its processing resources and attention to focus on one or a few things, rather than spreading its attention around like other people do. So you can see how autistic people would become the specialists, while everybody else is more of a generalist. And we need that in the world. So my brother, going back to him, he focuses on shiny, on tea, on driving in the car. And knowing that enables me to support him to have a good life. And he deserves that the same as anybody else does. So when Fergus took monotropism, he took out 4 things that autistic people associate as being the core of being autistic. Our focused interests. For me, one of them is autism, another is mushrooms, another is music, but that's beside the point for now. He took autistic inertia. In schools, people are always talking about difficulty with transition. And sure enough, autistic people recognize that too. He took sensory differences, already recognized. They've hopped in and out of the manuals as what's wrong with you as being autistic. And we say differences rather than deficits, and social differences. So that's what he took as being the core of being autistic. And I'm going to go into each one of them in turn in relation to education, because that's what today is about. But Are autistic people the only monotropic thinkers? 3 years ago, there was a study done to try and think, well, if autistic people are monotropic, maybe that could be the defining criteria for autism. So maybe if we knew autistic people were monotropic, then we could run tests on how monotropic people are and find out if they were autistic or not. So it's not a deficit-based theory, nor is it a superpower-based theory. It's a theory based on how we learn. So a couple of years ago, they ran a big survey via Twitter, as it was at the time, with a big monotropism questionnaire that was put together with help from loads of autistic people. And they also ran screeners for if you were autistic, and they also asked if you had ADHD, and they didn't do screeners for that. And sure enough, they found that autistic people were very monotropic. But then things got skewed. They found ADHD people were even more monotropic, and they found ADHD people were the most monotropic of all. So suddenly, autism and ADHD came under the one umbrella, but you could, to make it very simple, you could think, well, okay, autistic people are the monotropic thinkers who internalize their stress, and ADHD people are the monotropic thinkers who externalize their stress. That's too much of a weird way of looking at it. It doesn't fit neatly into that. But it does bring into question our labeling system for neurodiversity in the first place. Surely then it should be about how we think, how we do things, rather than about putting labels on people. Back when I was a CNO, the label that people got often depended on their access to medical supports and on their social class. So children from more deprived areas very often got the label of emotion behavioral disorder. Children from areas where there's a bit more money got autism, or where the parents were a little bit more sensitive about label, DCD. Different labels for similar ways of looking at things. So I really question our labeling system at times. Again, they're defining how people are surviving in their current environment, but they aren't necessarily all that helpful. But I'm going to take the 4 things that autistic people chose as being core about autism, and then see how in education might we support that. So if we look at the focused interests, Fergus, and then backed up by research as there afterwards by Rebecca Wood, would have said, well, our focused interests, that's kind of the core of being autistic. Now, it really is how we pay attention is the core, but it can lead to those focused interests. So is the person looking at dust moving? Are they looking at theoretical physics? Are they looking at the color green? Are they looking at advanced maths? It's all that focused interest is what unites me and my brother, what unites autistic people. And then Rebecca Wood found that harnessing those interests at school enables learning and progression. So in school, we used to be working behaviorally. We work behaviorally with all our students, but we used to accelerate it lots with autistic children. So they might have to do a task first, and then they'd get access to the thing they loved. Now, if the thing they loved enables learning, if the thing they loved is how they formed their concept base of the world, then we need to incorporate that into the learning, not to have it for afterwards. And when teachers did that, this is what they found. The advantages of teaching to special interests. There was improved learning and curricular access for the children because suddenly school related to their understanding of the world, to what they were interested in. There was better cooperation and social engagement because the kids were actually enjoying and talking about things they liked to talk about. The children were motivated and more relaxed, and therefore the teacher and the additional needs assistant could be more constructively involved. They weren't keeping the child on task, they were actually engaging with the child about something the child learned. And I know Julie has mentioned the Gestalt language processing. If a child learns through what they take in about the world, through what they understand, then our Gestalt language processors are coming out with phrases from their films they love or from something that has a big emotional meaning to them. That's the start of their language, and that's coming from monotropism as well. So it gave opportunities for engagement with their peers. Now, parents were concerned about access to a broad and balanced curriculum and were concerned about exams, if the child was learning to what they were interested and not to what they were supposed to learn about. Isn't that ableist? So some people, most people, might enjoy a broad and balanced curriculum, but our autistic people and our ADHD people, and perhaps others, are specialists and want to learn about what they want to learn about. And we're very happy when they're specialists when they're older because we can use that to change things in the world. And our exam system, we won't go any further into that. Autistic inertia. So that autistic people define it as difficulty starting, difficulty stopping, and difficulty changing direction. Teachers will know it as executive function. So it's also to do with planning out a task. So how do we, and our occupational therapist will know all about that. So how do we support that in school maybe? Using visuals. So I've got children who think, I don't need visuals. I'm too old for them. Other kids need them. So I say, I'm getting old. I need the visuals for me. But to have those visuals or to have those lists for the children. As an adult, I have the list for how to clean up my house. I don't always use them, but I still need those lists. And I'm in my 50s, so I've washed dishes a lot, but I still need those lists. Our kids need that structure for how the day might go. Maybe timers. Some kids are allergic to timers. They won't enjoy the thing at all if it's timed, but some children need that. I use timers to start me in my work, and then I can keep going. Having a clear room and having a clear task layout can really help in school. And then knowing how long can each student focus and what do they need for this, because that brings us on to the sensory differences. Some students might need to jump up and down or to have a wobble or to run around every 2-3 minutes. Other students won't. But do we know each student's sensory loves or triggers? There are loads of assessments for that online. I love Autism Level Up resources, which you can look up afterwards. And then as they get older, as they don't have learning difficulties, perhaps, does each student know their own sensory needs, and do they know how to advocate for them? The more we can help students to say what they need without shame, the better. And then are they listened to? And that's where Leans comes in, to acknowledge that everybody in class is different and everybody has different needs for sitting, for learning, for whatever way they learn. And so are our students getting the right number of breaks and the right number of type of breaks they need to regulate? Because sometimes the breaks come in when we see the child is already getting dysregulated. Are the breaks already in their daily timetable? And are they able to ask for extra breaks if they need them? Or are the people around them able to see those subtle signs that the child needs an extra break? And then our communication differences. So are we listening to our students? Maybe they're not talking, maybe they're writing things, or maybe they're writing poetry that shows how they feel. Maybe they're just pointing to things. Maybe, again, going back to their behavior, maybe their behavior shows that they are incredibly stressed. So instead of, obviously we want to keep everybody safe in the first instance, but what is causing that behavior? Are they completely sensorially overloaded? Or as we said earlier, are they tired or hungry? What's going on there? That's all communication. They might want to use a phone. Unfortunately, at the moment, phones for some people are AAC devices. My phone has my calendar on it. Without it, I'm completely stuck. Certainly, we should be considering the electronic devices that students have in school. Sometimes they are assistive technology and needed. Are they communicating via finger pointing? Very controversial method. People had to prove that they were communicating when they already had so many difficult things to overcome. Freaker Ryan is a really good example of that, and Owen, whose second name I can't remember, who finished up speaking in Irish at a conference last year. So how people communicate is so important. Gestalts. I don't think so. Comes from Mickey Mouse, one of the students I worked with. When the person driving him home went the wrong way, this fella who never spoke before said from the back of the car, "I don't think so." And they were his first words. So how are our students communicating using Gestalts? And Julie can explain to you further how to develop that then into improved language. I have a friend who communicates via memes. So the therapist says you need to let people in, and the person says the door isn't locked, but look at the cactus on the door. So I can understand that meme. I'm too old to understand some of her memes, so then she can explain, but she has to go by memes first of all. And also using devices. Why are we not all, even today, I should have been doing it, using devices for some of our communication to communicate out so that our children know it's a totally effective and accepted means of communication? Isn't it great for autistic children, for non-speaking children, for nervous children, for children who don't have English as a first language, all these things? We should be using these devices all the time. And again, some children have more complex ways of communication, but are we listening? The children with the complex methods of communication, it can take a long time, and sometimes we rush by them. So are we listening to our children communicating? So they were the 4 things that Fergus identified, along with many autistic people, as being what autism actually is, what our needs are. And that's what teachers, what schools need to know. This was produced by the Aspergian, now known as Neuroclastic, a couple of years ago. And they were saying the autistic spectrum doesn't look like what you think it is. It's not from very, very autistic down to not so autistic at all. They were looking at these different features: pragmatic language. So do you understand tone? Do you understand context? Social awareness, monotropic mindset, which I think is the core of being autistic rather than one part of it. Information processing, how fast it takes to take on new information. Apologies for talking so fast. Sensory processing, repetitive behaviors, neuromotor differences. Now, in autism, we tend to call repetitive behaviors spins and stims. So our spins stands for our special interests, because we might really focus on something a lot, and our stims are our stimulatory behavior. You might have noticed I've been drinking tea the whole time. This is my original webinar cup. All that bit has gone away. I have a new one on, and this one is getting worn away now. One of my stims. Doesn't do anybody any harm, lets me release energy. And then the neuromotor differences can tie in with dyspraxia or apraxia or that kind of thing. I added on to that because there's this awful theory that autistic people lack empathy. So I put in emotional empathy and cognitive empathy, because autistic people, we feel our emotions as much as anybody else. I wonder about more so about things we really love. But cognitively, sometimes if another person is having an emotional reaction to something, it may need to be explained to us what is going on. And then we can access it in terms of our own emotions as well, once it makes sense in terms of our concept base, our monotropic understanding of the world. Anxiety levels, we need to know about this. Tolerance of learning, tolerance of running around, tolerance of noise, tolerance of light, tolerance of electric buzz, our organization abilities, our focus, our interoception, knowing what's going on inside us. Do we need to pee? Are we hungry? Are we feeling tense because we're getting a bit nervous or angry? Our neuroception, do we feel safe with the other person around us? Are they making us feel safe? Or are they a bit noisy or scary in the way they are? And that's something we don't recognize. Our own regulation. Do we know what breaks we need? Do we know how to regulate ourselves? What are we all going to do after this webinar? Some teachers are going to have to share back to class. Can you at least take a breathing break first, just to bring yourself back into yourself? And then stimming and masking. Masking being huge, which could take a whole webinar. So imagine if instead of having all these labels in our class, that students from the moment they're going into school, we profile how they might be in terms of all these things. And I know it's a lot of things, but some things won't necessarily be so important for all students, but some things will be really important. And then we make our classes such that we try and meet most people's needs most of the time. My contention would be that will get rid of a lot of our concerns about students in school. It might make schools easier places to be. And even though this is about autism, I think it might cover an awful lot of different people who are suddenly out of the loop. So if we had all this information, would we really need a label? It's not really about autism. And just to finish up, so my understanding of the neurodiversity paradigm is that all people have unique brains and all of them deserve inclusion. Each person's brain is to be equally valued. And yes, I love looking at everybody's strengths and it's important in terms of relating to them, but all people's brains are to be valued. It's not that the neuroscientist is better than the person who is sitting looking at the window. All brains are of value, and we're living in a world that is undermining that seriously at the moment. So neurodiversity is suddenly becoming more of a political issue than ever before. Supporting all of our students is a human rights issue, to learn, to be, to live, to thrive. And of course, collectively, society is better when everyone is included. My brother doesn't so much actively do things, but the peace, the Zen peace that he gives, the calmness that he gives, the uproarious laughs that he has, the way he supports people who are tearing around to slow down. He doesn't just exist to be productive for us, but those are lovely things that he offers. And also to remember, a student or a teacher can be neurodivergent without any medical label or diagnosis. I think we've come to that in our conversation anyway. So teachers' needs also need to be met. So I would love to have webinars for principals, because it's the culture of school that enables the teachers to feel safe, to create safe classes. That's really it for now. Just a little ad there for Leans at the bottom, which I think we're going to share afterwards anyway. But that's my perspective on neurodiversity in general. And I think I've just stuck to the 15 minutes.
Oh, Joan, you're a legend. Thank you. That's really, really. Oh, Joan, you're a legend. Thank you. That's really, really powerful. The last thing in particular about your brother is really touching, and it kind of speaks to this bit about moving away from the horribleness of the DSM-5 and like why is it the go-to when it's just one manual, it's just one ideology, and you have all these other more inclusive and much more beautiful ideologies that usually come from, oppressed people and people who have been treated badly over the years. And like the idea that I think people in, I'm going to get this wrong, Inuit nations that teach that people with Down syndrome are traditionally regarded as sacred. So like there are all different communities that have much better ways of looking at people who are different than we generally have done.
I think
it's because of medicine.
Other Indigenous communities, I know, for example, in the Maori language, I think the word for autism is wakatanga, which means in his or her own space, and the word for ADHD is a warateni, which means he or she flits from thing to thing. And even the Cree language, it's Tatuyatihama. Oh, I butchered that one definitely. Yeah, but I was just going into the fact that a lot more Indigenous communities are so much more accepting of just natural diversity, and it's definitely an awful lot more of a recent, more modern take in it, that if you don't conform to this form of what a contributing human to society should be, then you're seen as kind of less than, or something that needs to be given help to get up to that standard.
One of those things, Joan, and I could literally talk to the people here for about 6 hours about this, is the one of the tools that has been used in trying to force kids to conform has been social skills training. My hobby horse. And I suppose I just wanted to get the panel's views on like the harm really that can be caused to neurodivergent children who are, you know, required to learn social skills. And they're not their social skills, they're the kind of skills that are imposed upon them. And the one that we always mention is the eye contact, being required to make X amount of seconds of eye contact, or to have a conversation that goes from you to me to you to me without us interrupting each other, which Davida and I will never get. Or
I can't believe it's still going. Eye contact. You know, you might as well call it masking training. And we all do wear masks for certain things. But autistic people socialize differently. When autistic people are together, we don't shut up really, except for the people who want to be quiet. I go to a conference, or I used to go to a conference in the UK for autistic people, and there would be a quiet room for the break times. And so the first night, everybody would be a bit quiet, getting to know each other. And so the quiet room would only have a few people in it. By the next day, that would be getting full. By the second day, people would be asking for quiet in the quiet room because people were yapping and talking there. So once people socialize in their own way, people socialize. And so why teach people? I mean, some autistic people want to learn social skills for a certain thing, like we all learn interview skills. So perhaps somebody wants to learn how to pass an interview, how to mask for that period of time, so that they are aware that they are masking, that they are playing a game, and therefore they're doing that. They might want to have training in that for the majority society.
Can I ask you about that, right? Because I always hear this. I always hear this. Oh, but they need to learn the social skills if they want to pass themselves. And, you know, they want to learn how to be cool in front of their peers. Where I think that if
you can't be cool in front of your peers.
If you could just maybe, you know, have a conversation with the person who's saying that, and generally it's a parent, that the longer term impact of getting your kid to appear more typical is more damaging to them longer term. If your child, if their external expression of their internal, you know, mindset is to pierce every part of their body or have a tattoo or the length of it, whatever it is, why can they not do that? It's not hurting anybody. Why do I have to look at you in the eye for how many seconds? I'm listening and I understand and I can tell you the answer, you know, without doing that.
The eye contact is so silly because I know teachers want to know everybody's paying attention, but there's other ways other than eye contact. So I generally say, you know, have a look at the board or the picture or the face if you must have them in a class. But when I work with children individually, we have our own ways of finding out if they're paying attention or not, usually asking questions or not, because all my teenagers will tell me they are paying attention when they usually aren't, which is what teenagers do, be they autistic or not. So we just have to find ways of that. But eye contact is just so silly because some people are paying so much attention to eye contact that then they can't learn. Most autistic people will say, well, if I am looking at your eyes, that's lovely, but I can't do anything else then. I can't be listening. So which do you prefer? But also, as you're getting to also, is the harmful mental health effects of masking. I was at a lovely talk, and you can access, I think there's some of their slides online, I'm not sure still, but it was a talk by this bank manager who went by Lexi, who was assigned male at birth, but who wore women's clothes a lot of the time, and was also autistic. And so I was at a talk in a safe autistic space with them, so they were being their honest selves. But their big mental health difficulty came because they didn't know who they were. So when they were with this friend, they were this Lexi, or maybe another name. When they were with that friend, they were that Lexi. And during COVID, I realized that was me, that all of my friendships, I was morphing to be who they needed me to be. And so I came out of COVID as myself, and a lot of my friendships changed. But I knew who I was then. And I still mask some of the time because you want to keep the friendship. I mean, we all hold in what we'd really like to do some of the time, but when is it masking and when is it maintaining a friendship? You know, there's a fine line there.
I completely agree. And I think the thing is that, you know, social skills training for children, like that is so gone. That is so over. Even with more traditional, you know, this isn't even a neuro-affirmative new thing in the last 2 years. You know, 7, 8, 9 years ago, even the more traditional psychologists were realizing social skills training does not work. Even if you wanted it to work, it does not work. And the newer understanding is it's extremely, extremely damaging for children. I mean, I can't emphasize how damaging it is, because every time that you try to teach somebody how to communicate in a way that isn't natural to them, you are giving them the message, how you communicate is wrong.
It's wrong.
What you're doing is wrong. Your way of being in this world is wrong. So it's so vitally, vitally important. I mean, there should be absolutely no social skills training. But what is helpful is, like you were talking about with the Dean's program, is this is how different people communicate. So it is okay if you are also balancing that with, God, aren't neurotypical people obsessed with eye contact? You know, they love eye contact, and oftentimes, and in our society in Ireland, because not all societies expect eye contact at all. You know, in Ireland, you know, it can be seen that eye contact is a sign of listening for some people, but we know other people, you know, it's hard when you're making eye contact. It's actually really difficult and uncomfortable. And then that opens the space that the children can talk about different ways of being, different ways of communicating. Some people love info dumping. Some people, you know, so this, you know.
And it's just like not to labor the harmful point too much, but just for it's that people really can understand, like in particular in relation to girls, say the typical social skills are, you know, when you're asked a question, you know, don't be rude in response. You know, don't say something that's going to hurt somebody else's feelings. And Enable Ireland, I mean, I'm hats off, you know, they are now teaching the parents that that's wrong. That type of social skill training is wrong, because you're teaching that girl when somebody says, you know, do you like my hair? And they'll say, no, it's really, really bad today. Or, you know, you definitely shouldn't have got a cut. It looks much nicer without, you know, yesterday. That's okay. If you teach the other person who asked the question, only ask if you want a direct answer or the honest answer, only ask this person. If you want to feel good and hear the, you know, flossing answer, ask somebody else. That will ensure that kid retains their autonomy, first of all, but also like their integral truth or their own like knowledge that they are right and they are able to give that answer. Because if you jump 20 years down the line where they're in a taxi with a boy who's saying, you know, I want to put my hand, you know, on your leg, and they don't want to, but they're worried about hurting somebody's feelings. Yes. That's where we get to, and that's real. Like that's, you know, and it also, I think, results in like the really, really awful statistics that attach to neurodivergent girls, you know, in terms of being subject to abuse, getting into abusive relationships, getting into harmful injurious situations like substance abuse.
It's really complex. Yeah. And it goes back to double empathy as well, that Julie mentioned, and we haven't gone too far into yet, that like interaction is a two-way street. And so supporting our children to be clear in their presence and authentic in their presence is really important. But there is also, unfortunately, the consequence that if you're always yourself, you're going to only attract tribe, which is great. But also when you're in situations, let's say in the taxi, you're going to need actually very specific training around that, because you come off, whatever it is about autistic people, there's what's called that thin slice judgment that Noah Sasson wrote about. Straight away, people know we're different. And people who are into abuse or bullying, because of us being our authentic selves, or because of us masking and faking being somebody else, they will still know that we are different. So we are automatically more prone to bullying. So an awful lot of training in dealing with bullies or dealing with criminals is also needed for autistic people. And there's no getting away from that no matter what we do.
Yeah. I was just going to say, because we were talking about like explicit social skills training, but there's a lot of like covert kind of things I think that happen in the classroom, such as sticker rewards for the quietest table.
Yes.
Or, you know, like kind of things that are done in good faith by teachers, I think, but can have a devastating effect on children going home. Like, you know, even creating competition in the classroom, like the winners get this, can actually be really, like, I know this from personal experience of a friend, can like make or break whether a kid wants to go to school or not. So just thinking about like, what are we rewarding neurotypical behavior in the classroom? How are we rewarding it? Even if it's coming from a good place and it's about classroom management, is there another way? Can we kind of neutralize that we're not giving stickers or rewards for good sitting, good listening, good looking, or whatever it is? So just something to be aware.
But it's not a level playing field, right? Because the kid who can't, like I know a kid who can't sit still for any length of time without making noise or strumming something, or it's physically impossible. So that kid can never get the star for being quiet and sitting still.
Yeah. And I think as well, when people first hear this, what it's coming from a very well-meaning place, but they're thinking, no, but people can't go around you know, flapping their arms all over the place, or making noise, or wearing dresses, or, you know, all of those kind of things. And they need to, you know, they need to be able to do jobs, and they need to be able to sit for exams, and society, they're going to be excluded from society, let's say, if they don't learn these things. But what we're saying is, well, there needs to be a societal shift. So what there needs to be, yes, they need to be their authentic selves. And we as a society need to change our expectations around how we expect people to behave. So that's why we're doing this. You know, there's a huge advocacy. You're working with the children in terms of, but then there's also this second piece of changing society and changing how we look at things and allowing for difference. Because it's like we said in our last webinar, you know, being in Ireland, there's a real fear of being different or looking different. We're all supposed to conform, and we're all supposed to look the same and act the same. But actually, it's that we need as a society to really think of. And it's a journey. It doesn't happen with one webinar or one thought. It's actually because we're so ingrained how we think about things. And this is how our exam system is supposed to be. This is how our school system is supposed to be. This is how people are supposed to behave. But are they really? Do we actually have to behave that way? Does our exam system have to be that? You know, we really need to start thinking and challenging those things.
And I think they're challenging it in the UK at the moment because of the, you know, the warning that everyone's going to be taken off their disability living allowance income support, because they're equating being you know, a functional, you said contributing human being to work, right? And that's not appropriate.
Yes.
And not all kids need to do the exams, not all kids need to go to college, not all kids need to have a job. But, you know, there is room for everybody in this world. You know, we need all different types of people. So absolutely, there, you know, the dog walkers who are there to love your dogs. You know, it's like, I just think that we need to stop putting so much store into, you need to do this or else you're not going to X, you're not going to Y. You know? It is capitalism.
I should say, like the adult autism practice, it's been so interesting in terms of, you know, all these stories, but all these people, you know, really wide range of people come to us. I mean, exceptionally diverse, obviously. But there's so many people that really did, you know, they learned to mask. They did the system, they became lawyers, they became journalists, they became all these things. And then what's happened is there's massive burnout, huge burnout and huge difficulties. And it's not because of anything inherent to being autistic or ADHD or any of those things. It's because of society and because of how they've conformed themselves into something that really isn't authentic to them. And then
mental health problems, right?
Very significant. Most of the, even like you were saying, like there's a really high percentage of people who've experienced abuse, really high of women, and really high percentage of people who've been through various mental health places, inpatient, outpatient, various psychiatrists, various therapists. And really the changes when they recognize, oh, I'm actually neurodivergent. And then, you know, the huge positive changes that come after that. So, but part of that huge change is them understanding that it's all about understanding yourself and then learning to be your authentic self. That's the key.
And on that, just as an alternative to the social skills, we find this really neuro-affirmative play therapist down in Cork. Her name is Grania Warren, and she's come up with the alternative social skills kind of training or manual. So we'll link that. It's only €18, and I couldn't recommend it to any school more. Like, it's a really lovely way of, you know, if you think you need to be teaching the kids something about, you know, socializing, then this is the way to do it. So the other thing that touches on is the school policies, you know, that are generally not made with the neurodivergent kid in mind. And I'm just looking at a book from Helen Clark. It's from 2021. It's about supporting spectacular girls, but it applies to everyone. And about how blanket policies, really zero tolerance approaches, don't suit neurodivergent people and can be discriminatory. So it's like your reward charts. They're for everyone, but they don't suit everyone. But also to look at like your codes of behavior, still called that. And, you know, we're quiet and we sit when we're in assembly. You know, so that means that the kid who needs to bounce, it can't.
Yeah, exactly. What do you need to be able to attend assembly, and then having that worked out in advance, or do you need to attend assembly at all?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
uniform policies. Like I've written
Yes.
so many letters to say this child cannot attend or learn in class if they're wearing that extremely itchy jumper or the whatever,
Yeah.
the trousers that have the seam on them that no other kid in the class might notice, but this child, it's all they think about all day, going back to your monotropism. So yeah, it's just sort of trying to think flexibly. I think it's difficult because obviously the school education is so broad, or it's a massive organization, the school system, and you need to create some sort of structure, I think, but it's actually now thinking about how we can embed flexibility and constant flexibility in that. So it's like last year we did it this way because 3 kids in the class needed it, but next year we'll have a totally different cohort of kids in this class. And how can we change and adapt and not get stuck in doing it the way we always did it for the sake of the institution, you know?
I'm going to say that some schools can feel scared to do something because they might get smacked in the nose from the inspectorate or the department or you know, whatever the fear is, that I'm not going to do that because we're not allowed. The circular says no. And we are advocating like hardcore with the department, with the officials, with the NCSE. And I have to say the NCSE have been really responsive and are really, you know, forward looking on this type of thing. And I know the circular in particular on the additional needs assistance, their role is something that is being looked at, because and a question from the chat is like the need for kids to have planned movement breaks, but like movement breaks that happen before they become dysregulated. It is a primary care need, in my opinion. But
I see in the chat though, sorry, no, go ahead with your question. I'll come back to it.
It's not allowed, right, Joan? It's not one of the listed primary care roles of the ANA. But I mean, I obviously, don't sue me, but I'm going to tell all schools, just do it anyway, because I don't know if anybody is going to come and tell you, we're going to take the ANA away because that's what you did, and I think there is that mindset shift is happening as well. But I think if schools on the ground force it, then that's the way to do it.
SNAs have been got according to what's on the list on the circular, but once they're got, they do whatever they need to do. But just I saw that question, and that question was kind of like a movement break, as almost a prescription. The child will need a movement break after every class. There's so much that can be done within the class all the time. Like as Jack was talking about, all children need movement. That, in between when you're going to take out your books as a thing from your copy, or when you're moving, to do 5 chair sit-ups every time you're going up and down from the chair, if you want to have that option. For the teacher to do star jumps every now and again. Everybody can do wall presses, just things that regulate everybody. And they aren't these big medical things that involve an SNA to take a child very obviously out of a class. They're things that are going on right through the school day that are helping to tune in everybody. And you'll notice the child after doing chair presses that's bounding up and down doing the chair presses, and you notice the child who's very reluctant to do them at all, or who's just doing 1 when they are supposed to do 5. And as a teacher, you'll note that, and you'll think, well, these children are doing what they need, and you're learning about that child's body and about that child's regulation. And as they are ready for it, you can tell them what their regulation is like. But the whole thing of the movement break as being an external big thing, this child has a movement break at 10 past 11 and not at 5 past. We need to move beyond that. We need to move into the flow of the class and having things in the flow of every class that work for every child.
Yeah, but they also help, like, to even pair it back to a whole class movement break.
Yeah, exactly.
It's helping everyone. Like it really is helping everyone. And I think you referenced the autism level up. It shouldn't just be about autism level up. It should be kids level up, because there's this like thermometer of you go from frenzied to pumped or whatever, and down to like a flow state, down to calm, down to chill, down to
it's every child.
Every child. But if you give every kid that little chart at the start of the term and say, when do you feel this, this, and this? And then when, we're going to take your temperature at the end of each quarter of the day. And if you're way up the top, tell me what it is you need to bring you to the middle. Or if you're at the bottom, tell me how do you get up a wee bit? Is it doing a press up, or is it hanging upside down off your chair? What is it that works?
Yeah, the lovely thing about autism level up is not that the temperature is a good thing or a bad thing. It's that being at that maxed out or frenzied state is perfectly fine if you're going on a roller coaster or if you're playing in a match. So the lovely thing about autism level up is they aren't kind of judgy All of
Yeah.
them are good. Like, I don't want somebody being asleep if they're in my class at the time, but that's a good thing in the middle of the night, a preferable thing in the middle of the night. And in Autism Level Up, they have all these states, and then they have, well, what's the current activity asking you to be? So then you work out with each child, as you're saying, do you want to level up or level down to get to that point? And
But the whole class could think about that, and they could be thinking,
totally.
like,
Yeah.
I don't have my my chart in front of me at the minute, but like, oh my goodness me, I am pumped for this maths class. I need to burn off some energy. Teacher, can I,
level down one, and they'll have their own little timetable for that.
Exactly.
And then the kids who are
everyone.
alexithymic, yeah, absolutely. And for the kids who are alexithymic,
mental health later on, like everybody needs to know this stuff, and this is why we end up with mental health issues, because we don't know how to regulate ourselves. And if you're kind of breathe that authenticity of who am I and what buzzes me up and what makes me feel a bit bored or whatever, and if we teach this from early on in the classroom, I think it's just,
and it's taken away, like the red emotions or the angry face or all those things. Are like, you're not allowed to be annoyed or
you're not allowed to be angry. Someone said that to one of my children. A teacher said that to my child about 5 years ago, and oh my God, he brings literally every week. He's like, but Mom, isn't that ridiculous? She said I shouldn't be angry, and I was like, yeah.
I know
that angry is a bad emotion. There's no bad emotion.
And even with sad as well, whenever people say don't be sad, but being sad's okay. And kids need to feel that emotion, to experience it and process it. If you're constantly bottling emotions up, like obviously Inside Out, which we've all seen, like you said, it leads to such big serious implications later on in life. So emotions are fine, whatever they are, and no emotion is a bad emotion. They all have their function to protect you and to help.
Yeah. And the thing with autism is we don't always know what our emotions are. So there's that thing called alexithymia. And that's, again, where Autism Level Up is so good. So my last student I worked with, he loved small animals. So I asked him, could he name a small animal for each of those states? And he wouldn't have been able to tell me if he was in those states, but straight away, Devil's coach horse was macked out and frenzied. Millipede was amped up and fidgety. He named them all. And he wouldn't have been able to do it any other way. So he would tell me every day where he was at, and I would tell him where I was at. I had to do it too. He wouldn't let me get away with it. And so, again, and kids use characters, kids use whatever. So it's meaningful for them without necessarily accessing that happy, sad, angry emotion piece, because that can be really, really difficult for some neurodivergent people.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I should acknowledge that I taught for a few years before I was a psychologist. And honestly, it's one of the hardest jobs. It is such a hard job. Like, a whole class, 30 kids for an entire day. I can completely 100% empathize. I was absolutely exhausted. I certainly didn't follow any of the recommendations that we are saying now. I shouted. I did all kinds of things wrong now, looking back, like really, really terrible. So I suppose the thing is that I can completely understand that it feels, on one hand, it's a good thing what we're saying. Like it's funny, we're really concentrating on things like movement breaks and relationships and kindness and flexibility. And I think sometimes what happens with a lot of teachers is that they really want, and they're saying, I'd love give me a program, and they're really enthusiastic about wanting the program. But actually, the good thing to know from us is actually, when we think about the things that really, really work, they are actually quite simple. They're not complex. They're not big programs that are going to take hours of input. It really is, let them wear a tracksuit if they want to wear a tracksuit. Let them move if they want to move. Develop a relationship, show kindness,
it's responsiveness, isn't it?
It's
kind of like umbrella term. It's being responsive to the kid in front of you. Whatever it's coming up for them, that you're willing to respond to that. It's something I do in therapy every day. It's like a core tenet of what I think, if we're a responsive society, then it's about the person in front of you rather than yourself.
And letting go of some of those expectations that homework has to be done. Like, there's loads of research that homework isn't even beneficial for people in primary schools anyway. None of my kids do homework. I just said, absolutely no, I'm not doing it. It's an absolute nightmare. I'm not.
Teachers gasping in the crowd.
Because I'm lucky now they're in a school that homework is optional, and God bless that school. But it's about letting go of, again, it's coming back to what I said before about our expectations, that we just we need homework because they need to do homework so that they'll prepare for the leaving cert. Like, what are we doing here? What are we thinking? It's a 7-year-old child. Like, they should not be at home.
The homework for us, right? For families where there is the profile, for example, who's demand avoidant, or who will flop after school, or will have a quite high octane experience after school. asking us to get that homework done is adding such a layer of stress into an already full cup.
Yeah. I've talked to so many parents. It's, there's just so such a common experience, and so the child is coming home, and then there's 2 or 3 hours where instead of everybody have a loving time, regulating and having some kind of a semblance of normal, nice, happy family times. I'm not even happy, just normal. I'm taking away. I'm like, we don't do homework, and I don't want to pretend like it's all rosy in the garden every evening. But to do homework is to throw in really it was phenomenally difficult and with no benefit. Absolutely no benefit. And it's the same for loads of parents. But that's just one example. I think that homework should be optional in all schools. I mean, I'm really
optional for sure. Yeah.
I suppose it's like that. Next. Can you think of the thing that you're doing? Is it hurting anybody? Or is it helping everybody? Is it hurting anybody? So if you can say, like, for example, uniform, does that hurt anybody? Yes, it does. Like the kid who can't wear that, that was me, the shirt, it hurt me. If the policy was you could wear the variation of the green in a shirt, a t-shirt or whatever, that's not hurting anybody, but requiring me to wear the shirt was painful.
Yeah.
Remove that policy. That's not a good policy. It's like going back to the policy, the principles of universal design. And in Ireland, we have the Centre of Excellence for Universal Design. Like, it's already out there, and I know it came from architecture, but it actually applies to everything. So that if you have the do no harm to anybody kind of attitude, you'll see that you don't need uniform. You don't need to be quiet in assembly or sit down in assembly, because the kid who's standing up is not hurting anybody, but it is hurting him if he has to sit down. So it's like, does your policy hurt someone? And
then I think, in addition to that, I think there's huge pressures, obviously, on teachers around curriculum. There is expectations, obviously, on teachers that students are reaching a certain level. And Ireland is very strong in literacy, for example. So there's huge pressure on teachers that there's certain expectations have to be met. But the fact is, all of the recommendations that we're giving here, it's because these children, without this, either they're dropping out of school completely, and then there's no curriculum being met at all if they're going to drop out of school, or, like we said, they're masking throughout the whole thing. They might make it, but we're talking about very significant mental health issues in the future. So it's not all of these things we say because we care about these children. It's all about their mental health and their quality of life, and making these changes. There are more important things than meeting the curriculum, is my point. Like, a child's mental health is more important than meeting that target.
And during COVID, there was lots of good in COVID there were lots of good circulars came from the department around well-being and around mental health, and then kids went back to school for 6 months. They remembered those circulars, and then they were forgotten again. But there's some really good material out there around supporting children's emotional well-being, but just again, the focus is on curriculum and exams and getting there. So whereas the department has put out all the good stuff, but it's been forgotten about. And really, mental well-being, I mean, it's not just neurodivergent children, it's children who are living in hotels, it's children who have come from other countries, whose parents are still stressed, who don't have the whole family. Well-being has to be a focus for us all right now, and it looks different for different children. So I like the way you said homework should be optional, not gone, because some of our kids who can't actually learn in school, I was one who really couldn't learn in school. I had to go home and do the homework. And the annoying thing was, it's a disability, being autistic, I was tired, I had too many subjects, but I still, if I didn't go in feeling I knew that, I would be stressed the next day. So in my case, the subject load needed to be looked at, but wouldn't have been. So it's different for every single child, and we need to look at it that way. In terms of neurodiversity, and neurodiversity can include stress from country, place of origin as well. So it's huge. It always was huge, but now it's huger, if that's a word.
I'm just conscious that we're running over, but I'm delighted that everybody has stayed on, and I just want to pass it over to Julie.
Yeah, I'm just going to, a lot of what I plan to say has already been discussed anyway. So I'm just going to kind of briefly go through a few bits and pieces that maybe kind of link more to kind of communication and communication focus. So we've sort of spoken a lot about the medical model and the deficits based, and which is deficits based, and there's a right way and a wrong way. And I'm really big again on something that we've already discussed around perspective. So at all points in our teaching, in our supporting of children, in our being in the world, we have to think about how we are looking at things and what lens, like Joan was saying, that we're looking at things through. So I think this picture really shows a good example of that, is that if we stand one way, we see this figure as a 6, and if we stand the other way, we see it as 9. So depending on how we're looking at children and viewing life, we see things so differently. And that can be a medical model and a deficits-based model where we're just seeing what children can't do, and that it's very like binary. There's a right and a wrong way. And I think linking back to my own speech and language training, we are very much trained in this way, and a lot of our assessments and supports are based on neurotypical norms and neurotypical ways of being in the world. And I'm not a teacher, I haven't had teacher training, but I'm assuming that that's the same thing. So when you think back to how you're trained and how your systems are set up and how your assessments and supports are set up, like have a think, is this based on neurotypical ways of being in the world? And do we need to step back and retrain and relearn how to support children from a different sort of a model? And again, this has been spoken about, but the social model of disability is one that I describe to, and one that I think is so important. And like Joan was saying as well, that, you know, the environment can either be enabling or disabling of a child. And linking that kind of back to maybe something that you can relate a lot more to in terms of communication. I am going to assume that nobody can speak Japanese in the webinar here, but maybe that's a wrong assumption, but majority can't. So I want you to think about maybe going to Japan, you're there on holidays, you go out for your first meal, I walk into like a little restaurant, and you go to order something and somebody hands you a menu, and it's Japanese writing, Japanese, you know, language. The waiter comes over and he just speaks Japanese, and there's no kind of no other information, only the written language and the spoken language, but you don't speak Japanese. The waiter's not doing very many gestures to support you, and there's no visuals. So in that environment, you can't order your meal. So you are disabled in that environment, and from a communication, it's because of your communication. There's a communication breakdown. And it's the same for the children in your classrooms. If they've got communication differences, which means that they can't tap into language, spoken language in the same way, so maybe some of the neurotypical children, you're kind of locking them out of that education. So it is the very same thing. And then if we think about it that way, we think about maybe what would support a child, or what would support you in that situation. You know, if the menu had visuals, if they had pictures of the food, you could point to it. If the waiter was doing a bit more, you know, gesturing and nonverbal support, he was showing you things, you know, pointing to bring you something out from the kitchen to show you these are noodles or whatever it is. So, we can all, that environment can either really help you to then choose your meal or not. So just thinking about how this kind of might impact the children in your classrooms or in your schools is really important. And I think it's something in terms of communication, there's a lot of invisible barriers that go on, if somebody needs like a walking aid or a wheelchair, that's a very visible and very concrete example of what supports they might need. But actually with communication, this can be just so invisible. You often can't see how much a child can understand, or you can't see that maybe they have a thought that they want to express, but they're unable to do it because their spoken words aren't coming, or they don't have an AAC with them, or they don't have a picture to show. So it's just important to be aware of it from a communication point of view. So in terms of communication, we want to get to a place where all communication styles are valid, and that we're not just heavily weighting our value on neurotypical communication styles. We've already touched on quite a lot of this, but even an awareness of what might be more what we would know as neurotypical communication styles would be that, like we've said, eye contact, small talk is really, part of kind of connecting with the neurotypicals, talking about the weather, talking about the GA match that happened at the weekend. And this is how a lot of neurotypical people will relate to each other. Whereas maybe neurodivergent people want to jump straight into their stamp collection that they have and discuss that at length, because that's how they connect with each other, through their special or their deeper interests. Then you might see, in terms of neurotypical, there might be more value on politeness, and directness, is known as being maybe thought of as a bit rude, whereas honesty and directness are really valued, maybe more, especially in autistic communication styles. So, we've just got to start to notice the difference, and that we're not kind of valuing one more than the other. There are just differences there. And particularly, I guess, in terms of what I'm interested in is in the communication side of things. And I think, just pulling out a specific example around that is that there is a lot of judgment, I guess, on screen use and media use in homes, and, you know, thinking that, you know, maybe it's a good thing or a bad thing, but actually in terms of children who are Gestalt language processors, they might communicate solely through TV programs that they watch, through quotes from movies, through replaying physical YouTube lines from YouTube that are really meaningful and communicating for them. So I think we can't kind of just say, okay, you know, all screens are bad and it's stopping interaction, because that's in fact exactly how a lot of the kids that I see interact. So, you know, they might say something or play something like, we got to get out of here, if they want to finish, to show me that they want to finish the session, or they're not so interested in what I'm doing. And I need to listen to what they're showing me on media and not judge it. And same with what we spoke about before, like AAC, alternative ways of communicating, that we've kind of got to build our awareness and to know about it. And, you know, going back to kind of feeling safe, we've got to start to use the language in the classroom, or the language in places that that we expect, or that our children are using, so that they feel safe. You know, you don't go into, you know, back to that Japanese restaurant where everyone's speaking Japanese and just start speaking English to everyone and feel totally normal and totally comfortable doing so, because you know that that's not the language of the context. So we have to start speaking the language of autistic and neurodivergent people around them, to show it's an acceptable and very valued form of communication. And I'll just let you have a look through the list there in terms of, you know, conversations. You know, neurotypicals might have a more balanced conversation, neurodivergent might go on longer tangents, monologuing, you know, info dumping about their interests and things like. So just being aware of those different styles can really help. And just to kind of like show this, illustrate this point a little bit more, I want you to kind of imagine this person, and you come across them. This is a young teenage boy, let's say, and you come across them maybe in that they walk into your classroom, or you're dealing with them in a classroom. And so one way of looking at this, this person is that, oh, maybe they've got their hood up. You might not start to think, oh, that's not really showing very much respect. That's disrespectful. But then on the other side, this person might be neurodivergent, and their hood up might be because they have sensory regulation needs. So they might be trying to block out some auditory information coming in, or give themselves a bit of deep pressure through their hood on their head. One view of this child might be that they're not showing eye contact. So maybe you're talking to them about something that they did or something that happened. So you might automatically assume then that they're guilty or lying, because, you know, we have these stereotypes that, you know, honesty equals looking someone in the eye. But they might be neurodivergent, and no eye contact means, like we were saying before, it's easier for them to listen. So you might then, in this instance, be trying to find out some more information. You might be asking the person a lot of questions, and they're not answering, they're not saying anything at all. And you might think, oh, that's rude, or they're guilty of whatever you're talking about. They've got something to hide. But in that instance, they might be completely overwhelmed and dysregulated, where they literally cannot access their verbal language. And you might think, oh, well, yesterday I spoke to him and he was chatting grand. I know he has spoken language, but because of the situation, it's literally like a little door into their verbal language, or the spoken language closing, and they can't actually access it due to overwhelm. So you might see the hands in the pockets and think, okay, this is an act of defiance. You know, you might feel a bit threatened about it. What's going on in the pockets? Is this a bit aggressive? You know, what are they going to do next? But actually their hands in their pockets might be about suppressing stimming, or just stimming, maybe just, you know, clenching, or I know sometimes I do it myself. I'll put my fingers in and rub them together to help myself feel a little bit more regulated. So that's what could be going on there. And the person, maybe if they're speaking to you, might use some more casual language, like I can't remember which game this is from, but lots of the kids say it to me, like calling an adult bruh, and they might think, oh, well, this is disrespectful, you don't call adults that, but that might be just their interaction style. So they might just have, you know, a lot of autistic, particularly people, might just see everybody on a level playing field. There's no hierarchy. There's no like different language for different people. Everybody is the same regardless of age or status. But it doesn't mean any disrespect to you. It's just their style. Or you might think, okay, they're not following simple instructions. I've asked them to sit down and they're being defiant, but that could be signifying a really overwhelmed sensory system, maybe a demand avoidance profile, where actually getting lots of instructions in an already overwhelmed body actually feels very threatening, and might literally ignite, or might literally trigger a fight or flight response. So maybe just freezing, not doing anything, or maybe walking away from you, or throwing something at you indeed. So it's just to sort of see that balance of, you can look at this child one way and have huge lack of compassion and huge mistrust and huge negativity. But actually, if you understand maybe the autistic or the neurodivergent communication style and what might be going on holistically for this person, it allows you to be really way more compassionate and understand them a lot more. So just some key takeaways from this very quick little presentation. I think I love this visual so much. It's from NeuroWild on Instagram. And if you don't follow her, please follow her. She's a speech and language therapist who's autistic and ADHD. And one of the things that a lot of maybe when I go into schools and things, people might say to me is like, you know, we can't just change it for one person. If we do something, you know, I can't change the policy for one person, you know, or how are they going to survive in the real world? And I just love this picture so much because it really clearly demonstrates that, you know, this octopus is never going to have 2 tentacles. They need 8. I have to think about that. They need 8 ice skates because that is what they need in that environment to be able to ice skate. So it just helps us to really think about what's the child equivalent of this in your classroom, and what do they need, and how do we challenge that 2 ice skate rule in the environments we're in. And just sort of moving forward, you know, lots of these themes came up already, but things like curiosity. I think if we're curious about things, we are non-judgmental. We are inherently non-judgmental. So the number one thing I think we can ask ourselves is why? Why is this happening right now? Why is this child not responding? Why are they showing this, you know, outwardly behavior? Is there anything beneath that? And keep asking yourself why. And at the same time, unconditional positive regard. So no matter what happened yesterday for this child, the next day I am going to go in and I am going to really view this child in a neutral and a positive way and be on their team, and knowing that they're doing the absolute best that they can with what they have at any moment, you know. And if they are showing distress, like how can we support them to not be distressed and to be showing themselves and not have that, you know, negative incident from the day before, whatever. You know, parents as partners is so key. And Davida was saying this as well, that like we've got to trust parents. Parents have so much insight that, you know, in the classroom, the child might look like the duck or the swan, but at home they are very much racing. You know, you're having meltdowns, and it's like the Coke bottle effect. As soon as they walk in the door, you know, it's like a Coke bottle that's been shaken up, open the top, and it just, that motion spills everywhere. So it's so important to talk to parents about their child's experience, because, you know, you might ask a child in the classroom how they're doing, and they mightn't even have the language to talk about how they're doing, and they mightn't have the insight to talk about how they're doing, but their parents certainly will have a very good view on this. And the final thing to leave you with, if nothing else, is flexible. We have to change to suit the needs of our individual students. And I do really acknowledge that, you know, in classrooms, in bigger organizations, you're dealing with lots of children. So it's actually much harder to do this than, say, me in my therapy space with one child. I can definitely make all the accommodations and it's much easier, but on a bigger scale, it is harder. So it does take a lot of thinking outside the box, needing support from colleagues, relearning, asking how other people do it, but just keep that commitment to flexibility, I'd say.
Excellent. Thank you, Julie. And I think we are way over time again, like we did the last time. We are almost at 12:30, so I think we're going to wrap it up there, unless we have any other questions coming in. The main thing that I want to say is that we will have this recording to share with everyone who registered. And I know it's going to be shared around with the membership of INTO and NCSE. So we'll make it available with the slides and with the resources that we referred to throughout. And if anybody has any queries on anything that was raised today or wants any further sessions like this, you can email us at info@neurodiversityireland.com. And we do plan future sessions. So you can look out for any news on our Instagram and give us a follow there too. So thanks again for coming, and see you next time.